Hello, I'm Brian Cox.
And I'm Robin Ince.
This is Infinite Monkey Cage, the show that we make because we passionately believe that science is too important not to be part of popular culture.
Now, despite that, we've made it a little bit popular culture, but some people have accused us of being laddish. As any of you who are lads in the audience tonight will know, one of the most laddish things to do is talk about quantum mechanics and evolutionary biology, such as, who are you? Who are you? And if you are, can you entertain the self-conscious notion that it may well be an illusion? Or, oi, make your mind up, Heisenberg.
You ate all the pie.
Yo mama is so fat, she is non-Euclidean.
What about, yo mama is so fat, she's red-shifted. It's intelligent laddishness, isn't it?
The thing is that, actually, even though we'll do something about the fact that some people said they find it a little bit laddish, and then we had to sit in the office talking to our producer, Sash, going, what do lads talk about? So in light of that, and the fact that we have, obviously, donned a new laddish mentality, we will not be talking about the nature of the Pomeron.
We are going to be talking about big rockets, though. Saturn V. For example, 363 feet high, a mass at liftoff of over 3,000 tons, and successfully completed 13 missions, including Apollo 11, the greatest of all human achievements.
So, it is the end of the shuttle era, with the Atlantis scheduled to be the last shuttle to take off on the 8th of July. We ask, do you still want to be an astronaut?
Yeah, for the vast majority of children who grew up in the 50s, 60s and 70s, space was going to be the big adventure. I mean, I certainly grew up remembering the Apollo space missions. When were you born?
I'm a little bit younger than you, but unfortunately look much older than you, suggesting I am actually your painting in an attic, which is one of the most horrendous things. It's all makeup, that's what no one realises. Anyway, Brian.
To cover space exploration, we felt that we would need someone who had a degree in astrophysics, someone who had a degree in engineering, preferably someone who had a good understanding of space medicine, and somebody who had completed at least some parts of astronaut training at Kennedy Space Center. Fortunately, our first guest has done all of those. It's Dr. Kevin Fong.
And even though really we don't need any other guests, he would have managed to cover all those areas. We then got worried that Kevin didn't know enough about Yuri Gagarin. Kevin, how much do you know about Yuri Gagarin?
Nothing at all.
Thank heavens you said that, because we can now keep you here. Our other guest, who made the fantastic award-winning In the Shadow of the Moon and new film First Orbit, shows what Yuri Gagarin saw as he orbited around the Earth. It is Chris Riley.
And someone who quite rightly declared it is rocket science with a recent Radio 4 series of that name, mixing her three obsessions, spaceflight, Satanism and Nazis, is comedian Helen Keane.
Kevin, what do you think now? I mean, we are seeing the end of the age of the space shuttle. Do you think, are we perhaps seeing possibly the end of manned spaceflight?
Well, I don't think that anyone really knows. This could be something that we stop doing, and it could be that human spaceflight becomes like the pyramids, something that people look back in history and say, it happened at huge expense and quite a lot of human risk, and it was magnificent, but we've stopped doing it now. Or we could be going on to the next adventure, and no one knows for sure at the moment.
Don't you think that's rather US-centric in a way, though? Because clearly the space station's still there, the Russians are launching people into orbit, the Chinese, the Indians have ambitions to do the same. So is it really that perhaps the US, the West essentially, are losing interest to some extent, but certainly Russia, China, India are not?
Maybe, and no one knows whether this is, human spaceflight is going to become like this sort of torch of imperialism that gets passed from superpower to superpower, and that's what lets everyone know that you're the superpower, you're doing more human spaceflight than everybody else. But still, at the moment, the United States spends more on human space exploration than all of the countries in the world put together. And so if the United States decide to stop doing it, it could stop happening.
Chris, how important do you think it was actually the rivalry, what was going on, the battle between Russia and the USA in terms of actually, driving man ultimately to the moon by 1969, which, Kennedy had said in his famous speech in 1969 they would, before the end of the 60s, get to the moon. How vital was that?
Oh, it was critical. I mean, it was a race. The funny thing was, in a way, that the race was won when Gagarin got up first, and then another race was invented by the Americans to keep the race going, to make it look like, well, that was just a kind of dress rehearsal, as it were. But, in fact, the Russian attitude towards space has always been it's a road to the stars. It's something that is just for the long term. We're in this for the long haul. It's not a race. It's a marathon. It's something that's there for the rest of the human race. In contrast, the American program was always been, galloping to get there. And the Apollo achievements in that short decade, it was 4 million man years were put into that decade. The work of 400,000 people for 10 years to get human beings to the moon. And I think, as Kevin says, that's maybe something that we will never see again. Perhaps we'll never see a shuttle again, a reusable space vehicle, but this sort of long haul that the Russians see it as will continue.
Helen, we were talking there about the US would have used the ideas of the evil empire. We had to get to up into space first, get to the moon, beat them. But actually, the route of the space program has some very kind of dubious beginnings, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. You sort of go back and you look at the people who were actually working on very early rockets in the 1920s and 30s, and they're kind of extraordinary. And obviously, I think probably most people know about how the actual origins were during the Second World War. The Nazis needed to develop a super weapon, so that's when people really started to get interested in space rockets. But you also have people like my hero, Jack Parsons, on the American side, who's a very keen Satanist.
What was his reason? So von Braun, you can understand it, part of a war effort. What was the Satanist agenda in space?
He was very, I don't know but he was very kind of involved with L. Ron Hubbard as well. And obviously it's very interesting because he went off into sort of the direction of building rockets and working with NASA, and obviously L. Ron Hubbard went off in the direction of founding an entirely made-up science fiction religion. But
hang on, I just heard a lawyer come through.
Yes.
And he said, yes, say what you will.
Sort of comes down to the really sort of interesting, the way that people were inspired was by reading science fiction, by these very strange ideas. So many things seem possible. So you do get these quite odd characters and people with quite strange beliefs who are kind of involved in all this in the early years.
Well, Parsons wasn't driven by Satanism. That was another part of his life. It just merely happened.
Like a hobby.
One side, I want to build a big rocket, and the other side, I'm a Satanist as well. Yeah. It's a weekend thing.
Well, I should say I got a complaint when I talked about that. They're actually technically Thelemites, not Satanists.
Thelemites, they're the Satanists that hang upside down.
And Chris, actually, there's something I want to dig a bit deeper into what both of you said about the motivations for manned spaceflight, because you gave an almost cynical view that it was broadly politically motivated. I mean, is that genuinely true? Or, I mean, the more idealistic amongst us would like to see a more idealistic catalyst for it. It's exploration. It's what humans have always done. Is there no component of that, and is that not powerful enough to sustain it?
You can't just go into space because it's there. It costs $500 million. Get up there.
Kennedy said so in the speech.
Yeah.
He said it at the end. Many years ago, the great British explorer George Mallory. But he says that he said he was asked why did he want to climb it, and he said because it's there. Now that was part of Kennedy's speech, a political speech indeed, but still there's that element of idealism there, isn't there?
Well, I mean, think what the space program, human space exploration was, isn't what it is today. And shuttle is kind of like the adolescence of human space exploration, I think. It's had to face reality, and the reality is the next 50 years of human spaceflight can't be like the last 50 years if it's to continue. Yeah, the American budget for space exploration is now, 0.4 of the national GDP. It was 5% when Kennedy did that.
Although there's the famous Chase econometric study from 1974, which points out that for every dollar invested in Apollo, 14 came back into the US economy. So as a stimulus package, which we all accept the veracity of, I suppose economically they work, that was one of the great stimulus packages of all time, wasn't it?
Well, I mean, if you see it as a jobs program, yeah. And if you look at all the big programs, going to the moon, shuttle, all that, they all have to happen almost inside of a single administration. Otherwise, the next guy who comes in stops it, doesn't want to do it anymore. And that's the worry.
It's democracy that's the problem here, I think, because these programs, as Kev says, are so monumental and last so long that a single administration can't promise it. Going to Mars would cost about the same as a banking crisis. OK, that is serious money. And maybe we're not ready for that as a society in terms of that kind of level of spending. But, going back to the moon, that stuff's all very affordable. It's very affordable. You just, have to have politicians that believe in it as well, because ultimately they're signing the checks.
Is there any chance the banks have just done this as a bit of a front, and actually, in 10 years' time, they're going to go, surprise! Oh, Mars, that's brilliant.
We've opened the first
point there already. Yeah. Kevin, what? I mean, this is, I think, again, for a lot of people, they almost feel that once we landed on the moon, that's kind of, there's been almost 40 years of treading water. Could you fill us in a little bit about, what have we been learning in the last 40 years of manned spaceflight?
Well, I mean, look, we think we've been to the moon. God, I'm going to start the lunar conspiracy thing off.
Helen, did we go to the moon? Let's just clear this up.
Pretty clear that we did.
There you go.
do that.
Why
Yeah,
is
you've got it.
that upset? That is a fascinating thing. I mean, Helen, did you, it's rocket science, it is rocket science, look into the idea that, just that can, it's one of the grand conspiracy theories where, the flag wouldn't look like that, because I'm an expert on what flags look like on the moon.
Astonishing, yeah, because it's very easy. All the allegations that are made are the same ones. They occur over and over again. It's incredibly easy with Google, with YouTube, to see those, every single one of those points refuted effortlessly. And I think it's just, I don't know, but the people seem to love believing weird things about the moon. It's like all the kind of David Icke, it's actually hollow and full of lizard people.
We've been to the moon 6 times with 12 people, and we've hardly scratched the surface, and so we don't know if there are lizards inside. But in the last 40 years, what we really learned was how to cooperate in space. And the first thing I remember is 1975, Apollo-Soyuz test project, the Americans and the Russians at the height of the Cold War cooperating, floating flags through an airlock and realizing they had to have a partnership in space. And the future of spaceflight totally depends on global cooperation in space. So most of what we learned in the last 40 years was how to get 16 member nations to work together to build this platform that floats around the Earth at 250 odd miles at 17,000 miles an hour. And that's a massive, massive, massive achievement. And if there is to be any future for human spaceflight, that's an essential stepping stone. I don't think that's fully appreciated.
Chris, that's an important point, is it? It's not only the technological spin-offs and the economics, but it is the, I suppose, spiritual aspect, for want of a better word. It's that, for example, the great Earthrise picture from Apollo 8, Christmas Eve 1968, or the blue marble, the Apollo 17 picture, which many people speak of as changing our view of our own planet. I mean, how important is that emotional response to these great missions?
Well, they were unexpected things, these, to be honest. I mean, it was predicted that the first view of the whole Earth, so more than Gagarin got at 100 miles or so up, the whole Earth would change things dramatically in terms of our perception of who we were and what we were in the cosmos, the greater cosmos. And, of course, it did. The thing I find curious is that, on Apollo 8, they hadn't got it in their schedule to even look out for this monumental moment in human history, the first witnessing of an Earthrise. And they'd been orbiting the Earth 4 times, and the spacecraft was focused on taking measurements of the lunar surface. That's kind of what they were there for, I suppose. But on the 4th orbit of the moon, Apollo 8, the spacecraft just turning, kind of accidentally as part of the program, and suddenly one of them witnesses the Earth coming up, and you listen to the onboard recording, and it's oh my God, look at that! And then they reach for a camera, and they've only got black and white film in it, and they take that first picture, and it's black and white, and it's never been reproduced very much because of that. And they quickly scramble around to find a colour film, put the colour one in, take the colour pictures. And when that picture was brought back to Earth and reproduced in magazines and newspapers around the world, it totally changed people's perspective. It was printed on flags and given out in Central Park to celebrate the sort of first Earth Day. The whole Earth catalogue was inspired by it, and the cover picture is that Earthrise, and that was seen by some people, including Steve Jobs, as the forerunner of the World Wide Web. Friends of the Earth was formed. It was felt that the Earth needed friends suddenly. And so this whole ecological movement kind of kicked off. So that was transformative. It really was. Apollo 11 continued with that, with these iconic images that changed our perspective of our place in the universe. And of course, ultimately, the Voyager 1 pale blue dot picture, which carried on that tradition.
You see, I strongly believe that the inspirational value of projects like this is undervalued catastrophically.
If you look back at the history of other explorations, if you look at Antarctica, if we were having this conversation in 1911, we'd probably sit around going, what did Scott just achieve, or what is Scott about to do? It's a waste of time, and he's probably going to get himself killed, and we'd all have been right. And yet that program of exploration becomes sustainable by the middle of the same century. By the end of the century, the ice cores that they're pulling out have information and science in that are literally saving the planet. And there is no reason why that shouldn't be true of the moon.
Chris, you've interviewed many of these explorers, most of them, in fact. So can you give us some sense of what the effect was on them of being part of this great project?
Well, yes. I mean, the Apollo astronauts stand apart from everybody else, I think, in terms of people who've flown into space. And it's a bit of a myth, but the common perception is they all went a bit off the rails after they got back and struggled with the kind of normalities of life, the mowing the lawn, walking the dog, the washing the car stuff when you stood on another world and back at your own. And that's not strictly true. And I think the message that came out was that they were all freed up to be more who they really were. And by that I mean that in our daily lives we tend to be someone else. We're always trying to be someone we're not, a little bit to impress someone at work or in a relationship or whatever. And some of us never get to the point in our lives where we're just who we are. It's a very difficult state to reach often. But if you've been to the moon and you've achieved at that level by the time you're in your 40s, that was liberating for some of them. And when they came back, they all went into rather strange careers. Buzz Aldrin was just Buzz, that he made a career out of being Buzz and struggled with that sometimes, sadly. Alan Bean, on 12, became a painter, extraordinarily. He painted before, though, and that was the point. He was always a painter. It just allowed him to be a painter. Buzz was always troubled. It allowed him to be more troubled, perhaps, for a bit. Apollo 13 is a bit different. Charlie Duke, on Apollo 15, went into the Christian faith and became an evangelical preacher. On 16 that was. And in 17, Harrison Schmitt went into politics. You've got to be pretty odd to do that, and became a senator. So very different personality types, but the point is that was already latently in them, or before they went to the moon, and it just freed them up to be who they really were.
Kevin, we're talking about the psychological effects of a mission like that. What about the actual, from a medical point of view, what would that, we're talking about just first of all the moon, and then if we did manage to get as far as Mars, what would be the effects or possible effects?
It kicks the hell out of you, and you get into space and you remove gravity, and you've evolved. Life on this planet has evolved over 3.5 odd billion years in constant 1G gravitational field, and human life over the last 2 million years constant with that input, and then you take it away, and it doesn't do well with that. Your bones waste, your muscles waste, your heart, which is a muscle pump, decides to atrophy, your hand-eye coordination gets thrown off. You spend most of the first 24 to 48 hours, most astronauts spend feeling sick or actually being sick, which is a lot of fun for everybody. And so when you come back, you're literally less than you were when you went. And that's a big problem, especially if you want to go to Mars, because you rock up back on Earth from a shuttle mission and you're attended by the medical services of most of the United States Armed Forces, whereas you're going to turn up at Mars and you're going to be on your own. And that's it, you and the other bloke on the first aid kit. No one else. And that's a big challenge. So the astrodynamics aren't that tricky. Wrapping people up in a life support system and firing them in that direction, that's tricky.
Is it too tricky? What's the length of a Mars mission, the minimum length of a Mars mission?
Conventional rockets, 6 months out, but it varies, but basically about 6 months out, and then either you've got 30 days on surface or 1.5 years. Those are your windows. And then 6 months back.
Just because of the orbit of Mars around the Sun and the relative positions of Earth and Mars.
That's right. And spending 30 days there after a 6-month voyage was like going London, New York, spending a half an hour in the gift shop and then going back again. It's not a very sensible way to go on holiday, and not a good way to explore another planet, probably. But being up there for a year and a half means 1,000 days in space. It's twice as long as the longest history in the whole of human spaceflight. And that's the boundary condition problem. That's the problem that you face as people who want to explore space. Is the next closest place beyond the moon.
Do you think, Helen, we'd have a problem in getting people to agree to it? Would you agree to a Mars mission?
I would love to, actually. I read an interview with Valentina Tereshkova, actually, who was the first woman in space, and she said she would love to go to Mars, even now, even if it meant a one-way mission, even if it meant not coming back, which quite often the right attitude, I think, maybe. But I think definitely, and I think because I think people worry a lot about the sort of psychological effects of these things. Like if you go back, obviously we were talking about the Earthrise pictures and how beautiful and the effect that had on people generally. But I remember reading about in sort of 1950s and 60s, and you would probably know more about this, Kevin, where people were genuinely worried that seeing the Earth from space would send people mad, that they wouldn't be able to process that kind of information. So I think people are always worried about this sort of...
Well, that's true, but I don't
obviously it's psychological and physical. But...
I don't think the psychological problems are overstated. I think there's some statistic that the second most common reason for abandoning a submarine training mission after people falling down ladders and breaking legs and things is psychological emergency. Locking... you've got to... This is... locking 4 to 6 people who may not like each other very much up in something the size of a couple of caravans for 1,000 days. And it's like Big Brother in space, except for the evictions are much messier. And you just don't want to do that. And they have done this.
There's an experiment going on. It's a Mars 500
Mars 500 in Moscow, which is an amazing thing. And look... God knows who would choose to get locked up for 500 days. If someone wants to lock me up in a capsule for 500 days, when I open the door, I want Mars to be there, as opposed to Moscow again. That would upset me.
Did you find, Chris, a difference with, in terms of, you were mentioning the difference in the ideas between the Russian space program and the US space program. Do you actually think, I presume you've met some cosmonauts now as well, do you think there is a different makeup of what makes a Russian cosmonaut and what makes someone who was going up for NASA?
Well, in many ways, they both started out in the same path with the same sort of application forms that you had to have certain heights and certain military backgrounds and so on. And they were both pretty focused in that respect. And as Kev says, it was purely because these were test flights. The shuttle still in its 135th flight next month is still a test vehicle, but in those early days they were very much test vehicles, so these were military test pilots. That's what they absolutely needed on both sides. The Russian program very early on, because it was a little bit about firsts, gratuitously, I think, when you look at the safety breaches that were going on, where they would take off everybody's pressure suits and squeeze 3 into a capsule for 2, just so they could get the first 3-man craft up. They put the first woman up very fast within a couple of years of Gagarin to get the first woman up into space.
Quite right, too.
And then, but they didn't follow through. The next woman to go up was like 20 years later or something. So it was just an exercise in grabbing headlines. That sadly. But
just to interrupt that, how the Russians have lost less astronauts in space, have they, than the Americans? Well, it's a question. I'm not sure.
So what they have, and Soyuz is the most reliable vehicle, I guess. But there's an interesting difference between American and Russian culture just generally in their approach to programs. And I worked with the medical, the sort of space life sciences and medical office out there, and my very good friend, who was a flight surgeon, told this story about taking the Russian flight surgeon aboard shuttle and showing him the advanced cardiac life support kit. And he was saying, Yuri, this is the kit that will deal with a heart attack, and we've worked out how to have a defibrillator in space. And look, and if you need to do cardiac compressions, you strap yourself down and you jump up and down the chest like there's no gravity. We worked it all out. And the Russian looked at him and said, Steve, in Russia, we just send healthy astronauts.
So do you think just to kind of finish off now, if it possibly is towards the end of manned spaceflight, what do we lose? Because some people would say, I think Sir Martin Rees actually said that he doesn't feel there's any loss by not actually sending people up into space, that we can now do it through technology, we can explore space without sending human beings up there.
Well, I've debated this with Martin Rees on the Today programme, actually, a very scary thing to do. And you have to examine why he's so anti it. And actually, it's because for him, operating with a modest science budget in the UK, human spaceflight would be funded out of the science budget, so it becomes a serious either-or thing for his telescopes and his other cosmology research. And actually, when I went head-to-head with him, I did look at the science that had come out of the space station over 10 years. It was for the 10th anniversary, and there was something like 800 experiments that had been done on board. And I have to say, there wasn't much that you couldn't have done on Earth or in another kind of laboratory conditions. So it's foolish to try and debate it as what science has it produced, and therefore make your decision on that, because it is, as we've been saying tonight, it's one of the things that defines us as human beings. Like, we build great buildings and bridges and write symphonies, and this is another thing that we can afford to do, as long as it's not funded out of a budget of something else. You've got to find a way of funding it, because it is important.
And must do, I would argue, eventually. We cannot stay here on the surface of this world, not even indefinitely, in the sense of millions of years, but perhaps thousands of years. Don't we need to operate in the wider environment? Don't we have to learn to do that?
But we're operating with a bunch of governments who can't see global threats that are coming in a few decades, let alone the thing that's going to slap you out of the sky, in 65 million years' time. Or
Don't say global warming. The Telegraph blogs will go mental.
Helen, would you feel a loss at the end of human beings going into space?
Yeah, it would be a terrible thing because, obviously you've got these amazing robots. You've got things like the Hubble Space Telescope, which has just been a wonderful thing, and, to encourage people to be interested in space. And also you have the Mars rovers and things like that, robots exploring other planets. But, a robot can't tell you how it feels to stand on another planet. A robot can't, there's only so much information you can get from exploring robotically, I think.
Oh, and that's the other faux argument, I think. If you talk to anyone who really knows about space exploration these days, they sort of talk about humans and robots doing it together rather than, I mean, it's a pretty old argument, as it should be humans, should be robots. And the other thing is, you get people out there saying, well, in a couple of decades, robots are going to be as good as humans in that environment.
Yeah,
if you get to the point where robots are going to explore planets as well as humans can, you've got a lot bigger problems than wondering whether it should be, like whether or not they're going to take over your government, basically.
I like the fact you've brought in moon conspiracy theory earlier on, and now the war of the robots has just been hinted at there.
It's my fear agenda for getting us back into space.
We asked the audience a question as usual, because you don't get anything for free, not even a dinosaur in cornflakes anymore. Ridiculous. We want to know who would you like to see sent into space and why. The first one, it says it's from Fergus, but I think it's from Giles Brandreth. A sheep, to see if it's true that in space no one can hear you scream.
This one says to me, our audience is wonderful on Infinite Monkey Cage. It really is genuinely a strange bunch of people, all dedicated to rational thought and reason. And this says it all to me. It says, who would you like to see sent into space and why? Marillion, to spread their musical genius to a whole new audience. Now, that says it all, doesn't it? I thought that science was becoming fashionable and beyond geekdom, and look what's just happened.
Have a look what the question is that's next, or the answer that's next. The answer is...
Marillion.
Yes. Suggesting that Marillion is in the audience now, I think.
Because eventually the air would run out.
The classic science debate there about did the Big Bang, was it basically there was more Marillion than anti-Marillion? And that's my wife, as she would love it, and I need the sleep. That's Jay Watts, just so you know. One of my favourite answers, by the way, was just this one. Gloria Hunniford. She looks like she'd enjoy it. Victorian Science of Physiography and Space Exploration.
Thank you to our guests Helen Keane, Chris Riley and Kevin Fong. Next week we'll be at Cheltenham Science Festival with Alan Moore, Dallas Campbell and Professor Ed Copeland, where we'll be asking, is cosmology really a science?
And now we return to what we normally do for the 167 and a half hours when we're not in air. I sit in a soft room getting a headache as I continue to try and understand whether I keep collapsing the wrong wave functions, creating mistaken personal reality.
And I'm going to listen to Woman's Hour and drink sherry. Goodbye.
Hello, I'm Robin Ince.
And I'm Brian Cox.
And welcome to the podcast version of the Infinite Monkey Cage, which contains extra material that wasn't considered good enough for the radio. Enjoy it. Hello, I'm Robin Ince.
And I'm Brian Cox, and we are in Trondheim for a very special edition of the Infinite Monkey Cage.
Normally on Monkey Cage, Brian believes he has kind of parity with the guests. You know, he's done similar research or has a similar breadth of scientific knowledge. But not today, because despite some of the heights that Brian has been to, he's been up 60,000 feet in an English Electric Lightning. I myself have spent quite a lot of time up in the loft, but never have I been to the same dizzying heights of our guests, because our guests have orbited the Earth and stood on the moon.
Yet.
Well, we haven't got there yet. I won't become an astronaut because I'm slightly wary of glass elevators. I really am genuinely ill today, by the way. This is just such a fantastic panel. So, today, what are we going to be exploring, Brian?
Well, we will be exploring the subject of human spaceflight with a panel consisting entirely of astronauts, and they are...
Hi, I'm Sandra Magnus. I have flown in space 3 times. I had 2 short duration missions, one in 2002 to the space station. I lived on space station for 4.5 months, so I consider myself a resident of space. And then I was on the very last shuttle mission, STS-135, in July of 2011.
Well, hello everyone. I'm Claude Nicollier. I'm a Swiss citizen. I was an ESA astronaut, ESA for the European Space Agency. I was selected in the first group of ESA astronauts in 1978, was sent to Houston and spent 25 years over there, but I spent only 43 days in space. So you understand the ratio is quite startling. But I had the great privilege of going twice to the Hubble Space Telescope on shuttle flights, including the very first servicing mission, which saved it in the sense that we fixed the optics. So since that time, it became a very useful and very wonderful instrument.
Hello, everyone. I'm Charlie Duke. I was an astronaut picked in 1966. In 72, I was selected to go to the moon. and I spent 3 days on the surface of the moon with John Young on Apollo 16. We were in an 11-day mission, so I'm probably the guy here that had less time in space, but if you get one flight, going to the moon was the one you wanted. So,
I'm Terry Virts. I flew on the Space Shuttle Endeavour, where we delivered Node 3, which is a living module on the space station, and also the Cupola, which is the coolest module on the station. It's a 7-windowed observatory. And then a few years later, I flew on a long-duration mission. I was in space for 200 days on that flight, so about 7 months overall. But Charlie, I'll trade you.
no.
This is our panel. What an incredible panel.
Charlie, you got your wings with the US Navy. Was it 1958?
In 1959, actually, but I went to the Naval Academy, but I deserted for the Air Force, and I was an Air Force pilot for 29 years.
But this is, what, 3 years before Gagarin flew. So when you first, you started flying, there was no such thing as an astronaut. Was Gagarin the motivation for you? What gave you the idea?
When I was in Germany as a fighter pilot in 1961, when Yuri Gagarin went up, and then shortly thereafter was Alan Shepard. And then a couple of weeks later, President Kennedy announced we're going to go to the moon, and we're going to land on the moon, and we're going to return safely by the end of 1969. And everybody in our squadron said, yeah, sure, 15 minutes in space, we're going to go to the moon. Back then, those here old enough can remember 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. It blew up rather than lifted off most of the time. And so I didn't think we were going to make it. But I went back to MIT to get a master's degree, and I was working on the Apollo guidance and navigation system. And I met some astronauts, some of the third group of astronauts, and they were so gung-ho and so excited about this job. I made a decision, how did I get that job? And they said, well, go to test pilot school. So I did. And that was the motivation, really, was meeting these earlier astronauts like Charlie Bassett and Don Isley and some of the other early third group.
Terry, out of the panel, you, the one who's most recently been into space, how much has the selection process changed in terms of how you can become an astronaut and the process of becoming one?
You know, one of my favorite movies is The Right Stuff. We actually watched that the night before my first shuttle launch. And it's really funny scenes about the different things they go through in selection. And it was amazing to me how similar it was. You know, some of the crazy stuff they don't do anymore, but it's still a very in-depth medical process that they go through. And there's some interviews that they try and trick you up, or they want to see what kind of person you are. But it's a lot like The Right Stuff even still today. Now, the pool, we just had a class, over 18,000 people applied. And before I left NASA, I actually worked to help sort through some of those people. And the pool is much broader now than it used to be, but in a lot of ways it's still the same.
So Charlie and Terry, you're what you might say the traditional route into being an astronaut, which is a test pilot school. But I know, Sandy, you didn't take that route, did you? You came through engineering.
Yeah, actually, I was worried about my eyesight because my left eye is right on the borderline of what NASA was taking, and so I knew when I was in college that I couldn't go through the military because I had no chance of being a pilot. Even at that point, I don't think they were really having women fighters. So I was always interested in science, so I studied physics first. When I was in high school, I didn't know engineering existed, so I naturally gravitated to physics, and then I discovered engineering and eventually studied that as well. So I decided that my route to the Corps was going to have to be through the science and engineering fields, which was great because that's what I was interested in any way.
And then you applied to become an astronaut through it's a public sort of a call for astronauts, isn't it?
Yeah, that NASA announces, hey, we're going to hire astronauts next year. Please apply if you're interested. And of course, when I applied, it was before the internet. So I basically called Johnson Space Center. I asked for the astronaut selection office, and I said, please send me an application.
But you said before we started that it was middle school. There was a point where you suddenly went, this is my ambition. Was there anything about a particular event, a particular thing that you saw? You thought, yeah, that's astronaut. That's what I'm going to be.
It's funny they asked me that in the interview as well, and I didn't have a good answer. I was 5 when Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin landed on the moon, so I really don't remember it very much. I remember my parents putting us in front of the TV, but I think it was just the idea of exploring and being on the edge of what people can do. And of course, who doesn't want to see the Earth from space? that just really captured my imagination, and it stuck. It's like, I've got to go do this. And I decided to try, because you never know unless you try. And yeah, it's like, maybe it could happen. And it did. So I was very, very fortunate.
Now, I know, Claude, that Sandy said you started in physics. You also started in physics and astrophysics, didn't you? I'm tempted to say what went wrong for you. And why did you change?
Something went very, very, very wrong. Yeah. Well, it's true. I studied physics and astrophysics in respectively Lausanne University, Switzerland, and Geneva. I was at the same time a fighter pilot in the Swiss Air Force, because in Switzerland we do this as a part-time activity. I flew Hawker Hunters for 22 years, which is wonderful. And in a way, both skills helped me in the selection of the first group of ESA astronauts in 1978. When the Apollo program took place in the 60s and early 70s, I was in my mid-20s. I had finished my studies. I was a fighter pilot. But for me, it seemed like becoming an astronaut for a European and a Swiss citizen, it was impossible, because that's something that the Soviet Union was doing and the Americans very brightly with the Apollo program. And it's only after 1975 when ESA or the European nations were invited to participate in the shuttle program in the form of the Space Lab contribution, a space laboratory put in the payload bay of the shuttle. And at the same time, the US invited ESA to provide astronauts. And immediately I thought, well, that's something I want to do. And I devoted all my efforts to be successful on the first selection, which happened in 78. And it's true, I was in a way not loyal to astrophysics. I had started a PhD and I never finished it. But in a way, I became loyal again to astrophysics when I had the opportunity to go and fix Hubble, or let's say help fix Hubble with my colleagues, because that was a service to astrophysics, but in a different way than doing research in astrophysics.
Yeah, you mentioned Hubble there. I mean, were you aware of the importance of that mission at the time? I mean, obviously it's a very expensive piece of hardware, but the impact that telescope has had on everybody, I think everybody has seen those images. Was that in your mind? Because that was all in the future, of course. You didn't know what that instrument was capable of.
Yeah, of course, the first servicing mission, when we had that pretty significant optical problem, so the telescope was unable to get sharp pictures of celestial objects, we were aware of the fact that the first servicing mission, STS-61, the 61st shuttle mission, during the whole preparation, we were aware of the fact that this is an important mission. And NASA made it pretty clear that failure was not an option for this mission. There was quite a lot of pressure on us, but at the same time, we had some priorities, because NASA wanted to be sure that we were going to be properly trained to do this very important mission. NASA could not tolerate another failure. There was a mistake of sending to orbit a $2 billion telescope with the wrong shape of the primary mirror. So it was important to be successful in the fixing of that problem, which was the installation of an optical corrector. We could not exchange the primary mirror of the telescope. We were well aware of the importance of the mission.
Charlie, thinking about the idea of failure is not an option, you were, before Apollo 16, you were Capcom on Apollo 11, which is basically direct communication with Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin during the landing. Mm-hmm. And reading about that, it sounds like that landing on the moon, there was a level of jeopardy, that last minute before actually getting the module down. Can you explain a little bit what was going on?
Well, we had a series of problems on the descent of Apollo 11. First, we had communication problems, which was causing data dropout. So we had to orient the spacecraft to different attitudes to get proper communications. Then we started having computer overloads. We had a rudimentary computer, but it was the best we had back in those days, but it was overloading and telling everybody that, hey, I got too much to do and I'm dropping off this job or whatever. So those problems persisted on the way down, but we had to make a decision, will we go or no go? Well, fortunately, we had two guys in mission control knew what was wrong, and they said, we're go flight. And so we continued on, and then we found that our trajectory was incorrect, and we had targeted them into a area of the moon that was unsuitable for landing. So Armstrong had to level off and fly horizontally for a couple of kilometers probably, and then pitch up, slow down, and then start down for a landing. Well, that took a lot of extra fuel, so now we're getting to minimum fuel. And I forgot exactly what percentage was minimum fuel, but it was the the last two calls we made from Mission Control was 60 seconds, and that meant he had 60 seconds to land. Then I called 30 seconds, and they still weren't on the ground. And so things were really tense in Mission Control. You know, they were close, but are we going to make it? And fortunately, we didn't get to the abort call. We landed with 17 seconds before that call. That didn't mean we were 17 seconds for fuel, but it meant that that would be the abort call in 17 seconds. But we heard contact, engine stop, and great sigh of relief in Mission Control because it was really tense. So we're going to make this. And sure enough, Neil Armstrong was cool. And he came back a couple of seconds after the touchdown and said, "Houston, Tranquility Base here, the Eagle has landed." Well, I was so excited I couldn't even pronounce tranquility. It came out, it came out twang, and then I corrected myself and I said, "Roger, we copy you down. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again." And it was a big sigh of relief in Mission Control, of course.
And you actually, I didn't know, but just we were talking earlier, and you said that on your mission, Apollo 16, you were very close to aborting that mission. Not quite 17 seconds, but close to not landing.
We were 1 hour before landing on the far side of the moon, and Mattingly in the command module had to change his orbit, which required the ignition of the main engine. Well, the main engine had a problem, and it sounded severe to us, and so John says, "Abort the burn," and that meant no landing. We were an hour before landing on the front side. So if your heart could drop to the bottom of your boots and zero gravity, ours did. You know, we were an hour from landing, and it's 8 miles beneath us was our landing spot, and they about to say, "Come home." So it would have been a very bitter pill to swallow, but fortunately Mission Control looked at the data. It took them 4 hours, but they made a workaround for Mattingly, and so 4 hours later they gave us a landing, go for landing, and then 2 hours later we came back around and landed. So it was very close to us.
Yeah, that must have been
It wasn't life-threatening, but it was, it was just a mission abort situation.
from absolute disappointment to elation in an hour.
Yeah. We were. And then we were late landing, and so we had the flight plan had us land, power down the spacecraft, put on our backpacks, and go out and explore. Well, Mission Control said, "Well, now let's see here. Well, by the time you get out and get back in, you'll be awake 35 hours, and we don't want you to make a mistake, so we're going to change the plan, and we want you to go to sleep first." Well, can you imagine 4 hours after landing on the moon, say, "Go to sleep"? And so we said, "All right," and so we took off our suits and put up some hammocks, but there was very little sleep that night, at least by me. John went right to sleep. He was amazing how he could just change his mode, if you will, but I couldn't get to sleep for 4 or 5 hours.
I couldn't get to sleep last night just knowing I was going to meet 4 astronauts. So I mean, it was. Can I just? You were saying that when we were chatting before about the giddiness of, you're on the moon, you are larking about, and you said, because of course 1972 was also the Olympics on Earth as well, and you did towards the end of your time on the moon went, "Oh, we haven't done any Moon Olympics yet."
Yeah.
Can you say a little bit about the Moon Olympics?
We had decided that at the end of every Apollo flight, somebody did something unique. Apollo 14, Alan Shepard hit a golf ball. And on Apollo 15, there was a hammer feather trick. Drop a hammer, drop a feather, and they both hit the moon at the same time. So Newton's gravitational laws work. And so we were going to do the Moon Olympics because there was a Olympics in Munich that year. So we were going to do the high jump. We planned high jump and then a broad jump. But we were running behind schedule, and Houston was pushing us, and so I said, "Get ready to get back inside, guys." And John said, "Well, we were going to do the Moon Olympics," and he starts to bounce, and so I started bouncing, and so I jumped, and I was probably 3 or 4 feet, over a meter off the moon. But when I jumped, I straightened up, and my center of gravity went backwards, and over I went backwards, and that was really scary because the backpack is not designed for an impact onto the moon, and has all your electrical systems and all of your oxygen and regulators, and if it breaks, you're dead. So I started scrambling try to break my fall, which I was able to do, and it bounced onto my back, and my heart was just pounding. And John came over and looked down and said, "You okay?" And I said, "I think so, help me up." So he helped me up, and my heart was just pounding, and I checked everything out, and I was okay. I'd survived this high jump record, and then I looked up, and the TV camera was pointing right at me, and my wife Dottie was in mission control, and she said mission control was really, really upset. And so no more high jumps on the moon.
Sandy, I wanted to ask you, because your experience is very different. You spent 150 days in space.
Yeah.
So I mean, actually following on there from what Charlie said, is it different now? I mean, do you get that? How has it changed in your opinion? How is it different to have long duration space flight? And also, did they allow you to do the Olympics and things now? Or are they a bit more careful after Charlie? Maybe
Well,
it's like, don't do that.
On the space station, they don't always see everything that you're doing, so. So you're probably doing some things that would be upsetting to them if they could see it, but hey, the cameras are off, so it's a little bit different. You know, the difference between I can't speak to the moon, but a shuttle mission is very much like a sprint. It's very choreographed. Every 15 minutes, you've got something you've got to do. Inevitably, you're getting behind. There's contingency plans on top of contingency plans when things go wrong, because you're only there for a short period of time and you have a lot to get done. So it feels very much like a sprint. When you live on the space station and you're there for months and months and months, and Terry can talk to this as well, it's a marathon. You can't work at a sprint pace for months and months and months. And oh, by the way, if something breaks, you're going to be there next week, next month, and so forth. So everybody can slow down, and you can have a normal lifestyle, because it really is, living on the space station really is moving to space. I mean, I wasn't kidding when I talked about myself as a resident of space. You adapt to a whole nother level. Your days flow into the same rhythm that you have here on the ground. You get up, you go to work, you go home. It happens to be the same place, so you don't have to go far. But you develop this sort of rhythm of life. You're just doing it in microgravity with this beautiful view out the window. Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Is it different, Terry, that I suppose you have a lot more time to think as well in that case? I assume that on a mission like Apollo 16, your timeline is pretty full, and you probably adrenaline is there all the time. When you get that time to relax and think about your situation, does that add to the enjoyment, or does it add partly to the realization of where you are in this hostile environment?
Before I did my long duration, everybody said the shuttle's a sprint and the station's a marathon. And after a few weeks during my station flight, I remember thinking, well, I've been sprinting for weeks. When do I ever slow down? It just seemed like I was always busy. But the thing that I did in my free time was take pictures. I like to take pictures of the Earth. And while I was there, we were filming an IMAX movie. It's called Beautiful Planet. And it was filmed on our spare time. Like, NASA never scheduled time to film this movie. So I basically took my spare time to film the movie. But thinking about the Olympics, Charlie, I was there during the Canadian Olympics, and Soichi Noguchi, one of the Japanese astronauts, brought skis. So we would do like ski jumping and keep on floating. And then on my second flight, there's an American football player named J.J. Watt. And if there's any Americans, you know who he is. And if there's not, you don't know who he is. But he's really famous. And I was doing a video conference with him, and he had just set a high jump record for how high he could jump. And I said, JJ, I heard you set this record. I said, watch this. And I jumped up and I went into this other Japanese module about 5 meters up and floated down. And he was, impressed. And so a few months later, I met him after the flight. And he said, hey, Terry, you want to do that high jump thing again? And I was like, oh, man, my back hurts. I can't do it.
Real quick, Terry, I don't know about you, but one thing you do spend a lot of time, in the spare time in the space station, it's looking for stuff.
Oh, God, yeah.
Because think about...
I spend the time in my hotel room, look at where's my room key, but in space.
But you think about moving into a house that somebody else unpacked for you, and the closets are kind of scattered all over the place, and you're not quite sure what's in what closet. So you spend a lot of time actually tracking things.
Well, in a way, the secret to find things in space is Velcro.
Yeah.
You know, a table is totally useless in space because this glass of water stays on the table, and the water also is in the bottom of the glass and stays there because of gravity. Without gravity, a table is totally useless, and we replace it with Velcro. Most of the objects, at least in my experience in shuttle flights, most of the objects, whether it's the lens of the Hasselblad camera or the body of the Hasselblad camera or food containers where you prepare your scrambled eggs, there are Velcro patches, and there are pale blue Velcro patches everywhere, and whenever you have prepared something, you want to find it again, you put it on Velcro on the wall, on the ceiling. Velcro is the secret. Without Velcro, no human spaceflight possible. Yeah?
Can I tell a story about losing things in space? On our flight, on the second day, Ken Mattingly, the command module pilot, lost his wedding ring. And this volume was 300 cubic feet, so it wasn't a very big spacecraft, but this wedding ring had disappeared. So we went to the moon, and John and I landed on the moon. 3 days later, we came back, and now it's 7th, 8th day of the mission, and he's still looking for this wedding ring. The 9th day of the mission, we're on our way home, and we have a spacewalk, EVA, we call it. Mattingly gets out, and then I get out, and I'm tending his lifelines, and I look over here, and there's the Earth 180,000 miles away, and the moon's back over here about 50,000 miles. A really amazing view, if you will. Then I get back inside in what was called the lower equipment bay, and Mattingly's now 3 meters out working on a biological experiment with his back to me, and it's just brilliant sunlight. And all of a sudden, I get this glint, and I look over, and there's his wedding ring floating out the hatch. And man, there it is. And I reached for it, and I missed it. And so the relative velocity just took it out of the hatch very slowly, and it kept going out. It's going to hit him on the back of the head. It's going to hit him on the back of the head. And sure enough, I don't know, a couple of minutes later, it hit him on the back of the head, and a round helmet and a round ring. And it took a 180-degree bounce and came back towards the hatch, and about 2 minutes later, it floated back inside, and I grabbed it.
It was the beginning of that story, though, which was the two things that you did as well. When you just we went to the moon and we came back from the moon. And it's just the nonchalance of saying that. And then when Brian said to you, so you spent 150 days in space, you went, yeah. And there's something that is quite remarkable, I suppose, at the fact that that's just part of the story. And but when you were spending 150 days in space, that's obviously a very different experience to having a 3-day movie. What were is there a point where it does, as you were saying, you're just thinking, I've lost things, I need to do this, and it almost does become a job, a mundane job, and you're not constant? Because I would just think I'd be up there the whole time going, I'm in space. I'd get nothing done. There's the Earth. I'm in space.
You know, it's funny because you do normalize to it. It becomes, okay, this is my life. I get up and I float over here and I talk to all these people on the ground, and then I float over there and I do this, and it becomes very normal. And I remember after I'd been on station for, a month and a half or something, I realized I had sort of adapted so that this was normal, and I had to stop and go, wait a minute, this is not normal. You're living in a tin can full of air circling above the Earth, every 90 minutes. I don't know about you guys, but this became normal, Terry. Just, okay, another day on space station.
Does it become normal, routine?
You're so, like I said, you're so busy doing all this stuff, and then you look at this view that is just indescribable. I mean, literally, you can't describe the views with words. And then it's like, wow, I can't believe this, but I got to get back to work. And this,
especially, you have to be everything, because we say astronauts, but you built that thing, so you have to be a construction engineer.
My favorite part of being an astronaut was doing everything. And whatever you think you're good at, when you get to the astronaut office, there's somebody or 10 people better than you at whatever it was you thought you were good at. But I got to be the crew doctor, and I was the dentist. They tell me I replaced the first filling in space. And the scariest thing I did, I flew with a lady named Samantha Cristoforetti, and I know many of the Europeans here have heard of Samantha. She's very well known. And she wouldn't allow me to launch before I knew how to style her hair. So I had to go to the lady's hairdresser, and for 2.5 hours, her poor hair cutter taught me how to do ladies' hair. And for men, you put the number 2 thing on and it's done. But So that was the scariest thing I did. We did like a real hairstyle in space.
Wait,
so
Terry.
It was a little bit of everything.
Thank you for doing that, because I didn't let the guys cut my hair
No.
while I was up there because I was afraid of what was going to happen, and I just didn't get
Normally women just let their hair grow,
Yeah.
or they do a trim. So I think I did the
Good
first
for
real
you.
woman's haircut.
Let's give Terry a round of applause.
I love the idea of landing. You've just come back from space, and the first thing someone says, "Have you done something to your hair?"
Well,
Yeah.
for me, as opposed to Terry and Sandy, space never became really normal because, 43 days in space in 4 flights means on the average 11 days per flight. And I never worked on my hair, by the way. Didn't have the time in short flights, and there was no reason anyway. But the missions were wonderful. There's no relationship between being long time in space and having pure satisfaction and pleasure in space. And for me, the fact of working on Hubble, this absolutely superb instrument, as well for the public as for the astronomers, was a huge pleasure. For me, in fact, the deepest satisfaction of being in space was doing things that were very meaningful. The views of the Earth, the weightlessness, the views of the sky, which were very touching for me, were extras that were wonderful. But the main thing was work on a scientific instrument on Hubble, which is an extraordinary treasure for humanity.
Can I ask you a question that often gets asked is why we do this? So in particular, human spaceflight. So beyond just that simple question, when asked it, and I'm sure you are, why do we do human spaceflights?
It's funny when we talk, when people ask us, and by us I mean either astronauts or those of us that work in the aerospace industry, why, we tend to start talking about how and what, right? Oh, well, we're going to go to Mars. Oh, we're going to build this kind of spaceship. And those are not really why answers. Those are how and what. The why, I think, and this is always a toughie because you talk to people outside of the space industry and they want concrete answers. The why is, I think, quite fundamental. We're curious as human beings. We're explorers as human beings. And we've been expanding our frontiers on the Earth for centuries, right? And now it's time to go and expand our frontiers off of the Earth. And I think it really comes down to something that simple. It helps us grow as human beings. It helps us grow as a species. It's a natural curiosity that we have that makes us unique. Unfortunately, when you go talk to funding agencies, that doesn't resonate so much. I think it resonates a lot with the general public. And so you can then have conversations about all the practicalities of the technology spin-offs and how the exploration that we're doing in space, actually any exploration, whether it's in space or under sea, helps develop technologies and techniques and relationships and things that benefit people on Earth. I think if you look at the space station program, one of the intangible benefits of the space station program that we really don't talk about much is the fact that you've got 16 countries who've been able to work together for over 20 years to do this incredibly complex project, despite any other tensions that are going on around that project. That's huge.
After my first flight, I was in space. I landed. I was really dizzy. We went through these medical exams, got reunited with my family, and I finally made it back to astronaut crew quarters, which is like a hotel room. So whenever you get to your hotel room, you turn on the TV. So I turned on the TV, the news channel was on, and I watched it for a few seconds, and I was like, you've got to be kidding me. I turned it off. Like, we think this is important, was the thought. A few minutes ago, I was in space. There's the universe and the Earth, and now this is what this is what we think is important. It really struck me of just how silly a lot of stuff is kind of in our daily lives. And I was thinking that 500 years from now, people are going to know Charlie Duke's name, and people are going to think that the space station was our first steps into the cosmos, and they're not going to remember whatever the policy for this thing or that thing. And like Sandy said, the mission of the space station is science, and we have all these engineering, technical, all of our NASA awkward engineers have all this stuff. But when I was in space, the Ukrainian Civil War was going on. Russia had annexed Crimea. The West had put sanctions. It was not all-time low, but it was pretty low between the West and Russia. And I was flying there with my cosmonaut friends who I love. Before launch, we did a toast, and I was like, you guys are my brothers, And we were like, there's this thin little piece of metal, and there's death right on the other side. And here we are trying to survive together. They're like my brothers up there. And all this stuff was happening on Earth. And so, yes, science is important in these technical things, but the space station has been, I think, the best example of how people can, Charlie's missions was born out of competition, but now we've become, able to work together. So there's really some big picture stuff that can get lost in the daily minutia.
Well, I see personally human access to space as a Darwinian evolution. This is a step in the evolution of human that will lead us to a situation where we have a better survival possibility long term. Pretty much like part of life left the water about 300 million years ago and went on land. This was, in a way, a biological necessity, and I think going to space is, in a way, a biological necessity. We can't avoid it. It happens because it gives us long-term and a higher chance of survival to humanity. When I say long-term, I mean decades, centuries, or millennia.
Do you think that is Mars the mission? Is that the correct point to be directing our next grand ambition?
Well, I think it's a logical step, because beyond the moon, this is really the celestial body that, on one hand, is really interesting and is accessible. It really is accessible. It takes a long time. It's not totally obvious that it's easy to settle there and get proper protection from cosmic radiation and other environmental challenges. But it is really definitely the next quote-unquote easy step into the solar system.
Charlie, you must have... I suppose Apollo is probably one of the more well-defined space programs, in that, as you said earlier, Kennedy defined it. But the broader question that we've asked there is why we do these things. You must have thought about that a lot.
Well, I think Sandy, in my view, has the answer. We're made with an inquisitive nature. There's this desire to explore that's within us, and whether you do it on the micro level or the macro level, what's down underneath the ocean, let's go see. And so the bathysphere, and let's go out to the moon. And it might have been a political decision at first, but it turned into one of the greatest scientific endeavors in a quest for knowledge. And I think we'll see the same with the Mars. It's just the Mars is there, and sooner or later, I think we'll put human beings on the surface of Mars. I might not be here for it, but that inquisitive, let's go see and let's go do it. And I don't think we can ever suppress that desire to, what's this all about? Let's go explore, let's go experiment.
How do you feel that this is really for everyone, but the idea, we sometimes will read articles or see people imagining the idea of us living in space, obviously on planet Earth in some ways in space, but living beyond the planet Earth. And we have ideas of terraforming Mars. And yet we're on a planet that's actually pretty much designed for life, and we're not always doing that well. How much do you think that there is a possibility that we would see a future where people were born and lived their life beyond the planet Earth?
Go ahead. I think we will. Again, I mentioned before that this is a step in the evolution in the Darwinian sense, and it gives us more options in the long-term future. Terraforming Mars, of course, is going to be very, very difficult, but we cannot exclude that it could be done someday. 200 years, 500 years, I don't know. But having access to space, whether it's with robots or telescopes, scientific instruments, human beings, colonies, gives us more options in the future for survival of humanity. And the only way we can figure out whether we, as humans, can become a planetary species or be stuck on planet Earth, surface of planet Earth forever, is to just go there and evaluate the possibilities of living long-term on Mars and living from the land. We need to go there. And I'm convinced this is a major step in the evolution in the Darwinian sense.
So I completely agree, Claude. One of the duties you have as a NASA astronaut after your flight is you go to talk to politicians, congressmen, senators, presidents sometimes. And after my last flight, I talked about 20. And the point that I made to each of them was, we all want to go to Mars. We were on the journey to Mars. And I said, the problem is not the rocket science, the problem is the political science. And they all nodded, everybody, their eyes lit up, and they totally got it, and they pointed the finger, yeah, but the guys on the other side of the party, if they would only blah, 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 And I'm like, you're not getting the point. So America had this idea of manifest destiny, and we're moving west, and we're expanding. And I think that we should go to Mars, but you can't just get there with words. You need a real plan. It needs to actually have steps and you need to stick to it, which is really hard in the American 2 and 4 year political cycles that we have, and it needs to be affordable. So I agree that we should be doing these things, but unless we come up with actual steps and actual architecture, like in The Martian, I love the movie The Martian, but this spaceship appeared and took them to Mars, right? And that's like the minor detail in the movie is how, you got to build that spaceship. So anyway, we should be going there, but we need to come up with a plan that we can stick to like we did with Apollo.
Do you think it will be different to Apollo in the sense that it will be a public-private partnership, a big partnership amongst nations? Is it too big for a single nation and a single government?
My view, America could do it, but we have the short attention span that it won't happen. The space station, famously, I think it was 93, 94, it passed Congress by one vote. I mean, like 250 to 249, something like that. And the only reason it did is because it was an international space station. So if we did not have that international partnership aspect, it would have been easy to cancel. And in recent years, we've seen big NASA plans canceled, but they were American-only plans. So I think internationally, it can be more effective, and you bring in other nations. There's a lot of benefits to that. But one of the most important benefits is it's harder to cancel. And international plans, you're not dating, you're kind of married, right? And it's harder to cancel that than it is dating.
And actually, that's true for all of the international partners on the space station program.
Right. It's not just America,
every country
right?
has gone through its ups and downs with support in that particular country. And because the actual what drives the International Space Station program, they're treaty level documents. They're not just agreements between space agencies, are actually agreements between governments, and that's added a lot of stability. And I agree, it's going to be an international effort, and it's going to involve public-private partnerships, because we're at this very interesting point in the evolution of space exploration where there are a lot of companies globally who feel like they understand space now and that they have access to the technology, and we've got some people with a lot of money who are interested in developing businesses, that they want to do things in space, and those things are necessarily going to be independent of government at some point. And so if you design a really intelligent space program, you can figure out how to help those companies succeed while still pushing the bounds of what governments are doing and the explorations going further. So one would hope that would be a comprehensive program.
We have a lot of people who listen to this program who are still at school, who are still making choice about what subjects. So I wondered if we could just finish with those people who are listening to this who have the same dreams that you had when you were at school and thinking, I want to fly and then eventually want to be an astronaut. What advice would you give to those people who are at school thinking, I'm beginning to think astronaut's the way to go?
Well, I would say, regardless of what your dream is, certainly astronaut is way cool and I highly recommend it, but regardless of what your dream is, you need to go for it. You owe it to yourself to find that passion and find that interesting thing that you want to go do and do it. You don't want to look back on your life and say, what if? What if I would have decided to be an astronaut? I wonder if I could have done that. You don't want to do that. Time is your most precious commodity. You need to spend it wisely. You need to spend it doing things that you're passionate about. Don't be afraid to try. Don't put limits on yourself. You can do it.
Claude?
Yeah, well, very much in the same direction. Be ready to take risks, but risks which are reasonable risks. Bungee jumping is fine as long as you are sure that the equipment is in proper order. And obviously, the direction of work and studies, the preferred ones are science, engineering, medicine, aviation, test flying, for instance. And pursue activities where you have to manage risk, mountain climbing, parachute jumping, aerobatics flying, instrument flying, these kind of activities in parallel with your studies and your work as a professional.
I can see a lot of parents
and dream about
going,
it.
No.
Charlie, what would you?
Well, I agree with those two persons. I think that I talk to young people a lot. My grandkids are in middle school and grammar schools, and so I say, dream big, and take care of yourself. You want to be an astronaut, you got to be in shape. You got to have a good body. And develop your mind. Pick a subject that you're going to like, that intrigues you, whether it's physics or medicine or engineering. Those areas, I think, are very important for space flight careers. But pick something that you like, because the day you get your degree, and you've picked a career that you really don't like, but you're going to get into the space program, all of a sudden the space program is canceled. So you got an education that you hate. So pick something that you like, and if you never get picked for an astronaut, you'd have a career that's challenging, rewarding.
My first book that I ever read, I was 5 in kindergarten, was about Apollo, what Charlie was doing with his colleagues, and it was so awesome. I just fell in love. I wanted to be an astronaut. But that's crazy. Nobody gets to be an astronaut. I mean, that's like a ridiculous dream. But so I learned what you needed. To be a test pilot was a good thing. And so I kind of did the steps along the way. I did everything you needed to do, which I loved anyway. I would have been happy being a test pilot. And I was always told, no one gets to do that. That's a crazy dream. Think about reasonable stuff. These other guys are a lot smarter than you. These other guys are better looking than you. But I was like, you're right. But I kept on applying, and I got very lucky and got picked. But so what I tell kids is, don't tell yourself no. Unless, like Sandy said, unless you throw your name in the hat, you're going to spend the rest of your life going, man, I wish I would have tried that. And if someone else tells you no, that's fine. You can try harder, pick something else, whatever. But don't tell yourself no. That's what I tell them.
I think people do that because they're afraid of failing, right? So it's really easy to come up with excuses. Oh, I can't do that, and I would never get to do that. And so sometimes we're our own worst enemies.
The biggest failure is not trying.
Exactly.
That brings us to Samuel Beckett. Fail, fail again, fail better. Thank you very much to, what a fantastic panel here in Trondheim. So thank you very much to Sandy Magnus, Claude Nicollier, Terry Wirtz and Charlie Duke. Bye.
Now nice again.
Hello, I'm Robin Ince.
And I'm Brian Cox, and this is The Infinite Monkey Cage.
And yet again, we are joined by a lockdown audience. Dotted around the country are hundreds of people just staring at Brian Cox's face on their laptop, which of course is nothing unusual, except, it's a smashing face for a screensaver. But this time, you can actually talk back to Brian Cox. So for our audience here, would you like to say hello to Brian? Brian, say hello back.
Hello.
See, it's lovely, isn't it? It's just like having him around the house, but even better, because if you did have him around the house, what he'd have done, he'd have taken your NutriBullet and he'd have taken your kettle and he'd have tried to make some kind of cold fusion reactor, and it would have been a right old mess.
What's a NutriBullet?
You wouldn't know. Your man makes your drinks for you, but there is a secret process before your cocktails and fruit drinks arrive.
Whilst most of us have spent months staring out of the window at the same old lamppost, we thought today we'd broaden all our horizons by inviting 4 people onto the monkey cage who have travelled around the globe while the globe of the Earth was rotating beneath them.
Today we are joined, and it's such a great panel. They are always great panels, but this is one of the most delightful. We're joined by 4 astronauts, and they are...
I'm Helen Sharman, first British astronaut and Imperial College London's UK Outreach Ambassador. The place I would like to visit most in the universe is the Red Square Nebula, just for its amazing symmetry.
Hi, my name is Chris Hadfield. I've flown in space 3 times, twice in the shuttle, once in a Soyuz, been to a couple space stations, lived on the International Space Station for 5 months, had a chance to command it for a few months in my last period there. I'm currently doing a lot of different things, running a technology incubator and writing a 4th book. The place that I would most like to visit that I haven't been yet is the moon. I've dreamed about walking on the moon ever since, since I can remember. And I was hugely inspired to become an astronaut because of the Apollo astronauts who went there and walked on the moon. So that's where I'd like to go.
I'm Nicole Stott. I'm an artist and an astronaut. I spent a little over 3 months in space on the International Space Station and the Space Shuttle. I do artwork to share my spaceflight experience in a way that I hope encourages everyone to behave like crewmates here on Spaceship Earth. And the place in the universe that I'd most like to visit is more of the otherworldly places that are right here on our planet Earth and the moon.
I'm Rusty Schweikart. I flew as the lunar module pilot on Apollo 9 back in March of 1969. That was the first flight of the lunar module, got to do an EVA with the Apollo suit for the first time, et cetera, et cetera. I've been retired for 20 years now, and mainly since that time, I've been working to keep asteroids from impacting the Earth, along with Chris and Nicole and others. And the place I'd like to visit most in the universe is the next meeting of the Federation of Sentient Cultures, somewhere in our spiral arm of the Milky Way.
And this is our panel. There is something about the nonchalance, isn't there, of just hearing, yeah, I've been to a couple of space stations. Sorry, and I think, yeah, I've not even been to Crete.
Rusty, you mentioned there 51 years ago launching on the Saturn V on Apollo 9. And as we record, just a few days ago, we saw the SpaceX launch, the first test flight of a new space vehicle. So how have things changed in those 50 years?
They've changed a tremendous amount, Brian. I mean, I was just thinking the other day, in fact, I think it was this morning, I was just thinking of everything new that's happened, and in particular, what you just mentioned. First of all, that was a Falcon 9, which 10 years ago was started by Elon Musk as a private venture. It's the first private spacecraft that's ever launched a human being into space, let alone to the International Space Station. He's flown 87 missions on that Falcon 9 that he's built, and the one that flew the other night, the two guys on it, the first stage came back and landed on a barge in the middle of the ocean for the 5th time. And I think knowing Elon, he's probably going to try to launch it again for a 6th mission, you know. So, I mean, there's a tremendous amount that's changed, but I think the introduction of private industry into what was earlier a government-only operation has made a huge change in things.
Yeah, and in terms of that capsule, I mean, we all saw those pictures. It's essentially just, it looks like a giant iPad inside now. Whereas, of course, it was a test flight, though, where you test flew...
It's like a Tesla, right?
Yeah, but you test flew the LEM. What are are there similarities in a way? I mean, we have to remember, I suppose, that was the first flight of a new spacecraft, and it looks so smooth and so effortless. Would it have been smooth and effortless as a test pilot?
Well, it's hard. I have a hard time putting myself in the place of the guys now because they're 50 years younger than I am. What I was thinking was, and by the way, it's really fun because you can get this on your own computer and do it at home, and I really recommend it. You go to the SpaceX site and you can get, I think it's iss-sim.spacex.com, and you can get a simulator of the manual controls that they see on their screens in front of them. And it's exactly a simulation of the docking with the ISS, and it's really fun to do. It's challenging too. People will get a good appreciation of what it's like to control a spacecraft, and especially to dock in a controlled way. But I was thinking, in a spacecraft that I flew, you had to have a rotational hand controller on one side and a translational controller on the other side. And now it's just a screen that you touch and push it. I'm not sure that I don't like the old controllers. Frankly, it's more intuitive than pushing buttons, but apparently it worked well for the guys. So,
Helen, you flew on the Soyuz, which is essentially the same vintage as Rusty's spacecraft. It's a 1960s design, still flying beautifully. What were your thoughts on seeing the SpaceX, the Dragon launch, and the contrast between the two capsules?
So I agree with Rusty in many respects. When you have that physical exertion, that if you have a ball valve to close, if you turn a knob and you feel it clunk into place, you really do feel that valve is closed. Just pushing little sort of touch sensitive bits on a screen, I can imagine needs an awful lot more trust and in the actual technology than I had to, let's say, because I could feel it working. But we astronauts, we had a great presentation by one of the astronauts, the Japanese actually, Soichi Noguchi, who's going to be going up on the next, hopefully the next Crew Dragon over the summer, assuming all goes well with this one. And Soichi was telling us how that even the fingertips to the gloves in his spacesuit, how they've been made so sensitive so that they can deal with all these things going on the screen. They're so sensitive that he can even use his iPhone using these gloves. So yes, I think there's been a huge amount of development. The stuff I had was, it was stuff that's been old, it's tried and tested, so it's going to be reliable. So I had that sort of confidence that it would all work. first time you fly a new one, that's really the test pilot stuff. That's something quite different. I think
that reminds me of when they developed the automatic toilets for trains, and it could all just be push button, and it would just go boom, open, close, lock. But people would go, but how do I know it's locked? So they had to add a handle that basically does nothing. It's all right. There's no one's going to catch me having a wee because clunk. There's been a clunk sound, and I pulled the handle. It's a fascinating part of that kind of humanity. The things that I still want to hear a clunk. I need a clunk and a handle. I wanted to ask you, Nicole, about this again. SpaceX watching that, because I imagine sometimes amongst astronauts there's a bit of competition where people will say, oh well, you had luxury the way you went up. Going up with the shuttle's just a big plane. Do you find watching SpaceX, what do you feel were perhaps the greatest differences, the greatest changes from your own experience?
Well, I think it was interesting to me that we went, I don't know if back is the word, went back to the capsule, right? After having that opportunity to fly on this winged vehicle, and especially from a landing standpoint. I don't know, Chris, you can speak to this too. That little chirp on the runway after landing, that's nice. That's nice. First of all, I have to say, when I watched this launch, I really watched it from, I don't know, it was more kind of a people side of it than the hardware, even for me as I watched it. Both of those guys were in my astronaut class, in the class of 2000, and their wives, Megan and Karen. All four of us, or five of us, I guess, started together as astronauts. And so it was so cool to me to see these guys flying as the test pilots on this new spacecraft, and actually to feel like family as we watch them do that, because I can tell you it's a lot more difficult to watch somebody, strap into a spacecraft and lift off the planet with millions of pounds of thrust underneath them than it is to be the person strapping in.
Yeah, so. Chris, you've the only person who's flown both, right? So you've flown shuttle and Soyuz. So how do you contrast those vehicles? And certainly with Dragon now, is that a real step forward? I mean, as Nicole said, it struck me that there's virtually nothing inside it apart from those 3 iPads. It's quite it's a beautifully designed
dinosaur in there.
Well, yeah, an inflatable dinosaur. It's quite a beautifully designed piece of science fiction, isn't it?
It is. The space shuttle looked like beautifully designed science fiction when it first came out in '81 as well. The space shuttle had 500 switches and circuit breakers in the cockpit, and that may be as reassuring as a handle on the toilet door. But in fact, it's 500 mechanical devices that can fail. And in fact, the shuttle was completely fly-by-wire. When you pull back on the shuttle stick, you weren't connected to anything. You were just talking to a computer. And even the Soyuz, Brian, I don't think I've ever told you this, on my Soyuz flight, we were lying on the launch pad, and the Soyuz used to be completely analog. It was just all manual. But they've slowly made it more and more computerized. We were lying on our back, and they were having troubles getting ready for launch. And they had us reboot the Soyuz before launch. And as it rebooted, that noise came in of that Windows tone, that you hear when you reboot. And it was just so funny, lying on our backs, about to leave Earth, and boom, 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 boom. And I thought, okay, fine.
Spiraling rainbow.
Yeah, that little rainbow is very nice. Yeah, right. So I kind of thought, it's kind. I used to be a test pilot as well. It's one of those things, you're going to do something dangerous. You know that you, just like Bob and Doug were, are hugely ready. And statistics don't really matter at that point. Either it's going to or it's not. And you just have to accept that and do your absolute best. Fortunately, great engineering, a pretty good pedigree after 10 years, and they dock with Space Station beautifully. Great ship.
Yeah, the fact, Brian, that they couldn't even feel it when it actually docked. I mean, that was an amazing thing in terms of the improvements in automation. I mean, we had no automation in terms of something like docking back 50 years ago. But the fact that they didn't even realize that they couldn't even feel when they touched the space station was a great testament to the improvements. That's got to be fun.
But I think the really interesting thing that they've almost gone backwards in is the coming back to Earth, because of course Crew Dragon's going to splash down. I mean, like you did, Rusty. But I mean, perhaps Chris might be able to answer this, because I mean, in Shuttle, of course, you only could land on dry land. In Soyuz, actually, we had an alternative. It was designed to land on dry land, but we could have ended up in the water and been quite safe had it done so. So, having flown both, did it give you that greater sense of, I don't know, of comfort, knowing that whatever happened, you could return to Earth wherever you wanted in Soyuz? Or does it not matter?
The space shuttle was incredibly fragile. No matter what failed, the only hope was you had to have enough systems still working and tires still good and temperatures and everything that you could land on a runway. I mean, that made the shuttle so complex to maintain. And I think we're going through an evolution, and we're actually building spaceships now that are designed the way they're always going to look. You know, it's like if you look at the Wright brothers airplane or Blériot's airplane, you look at those designs now and they look stupid. Like, why did they put the tail on the front, you know, and the engine? That's dumb. That's not a good idea. But at the time, it was the best we could think of. And I think the shuttle will go down in history as a fascinating, interesting design, but not the one that is going to reflect what the eventual shape of spaceships is going to be. And I love the fact that and Nicole as well, the whole time we were up on the space station, you could jump in your Soyuz and just push, you know, the burn on the engines. And if you landed anywhere, you had enough equipment on board and a safe enough system that you were going to make it back to the surface of the Earth okay.
Chris mentioned he's a test pilot from a test pilot background. I know, Rusty, you've got, 4,000 hours on jet fighters or something, again, military pilot. Nicole, engineering, and Helen, chemistry initially, wasn't chemical engineering?
Chemistry, yeah.
So I wanted to ask you all really how you see that being an astronaut changing in the 21st century now, when we'll have young people listening to this. I suppose you don't have to be a test pilot anymore. The goal is to make it safe enough and easy enough for anyone to fly.
Yeah, even Robin could do it, maybe. I don't know. Maybe not.
No. Do you know what? When I was swearing because I was trying to actually just get one microphone plugged into the computer to try and remotely record this, I looked for a moment and went, I am one of the reasons I would never have been in Apollo 13 or any of those other missions. Who's the guy crying and kicking stuff? There was an error here.
They could medicate you.
That's what Brian says the whole time. Can we medicate him before every show?
But I think, Brian, to answer your question, I think it's going to evolve from being professional astronauts, like early on, where you need professional test pilots. Even if you go on whatever airline, once we get back to some sort of normal business, with British Airways, the majority of people on board have zero qualifications. They had a 3-minute briefing, from.
Yes, I'm so sorry. They've just started to medicate me, and I've now moved into my I believe I'm a dog position. This is one of the things that I find beautiful about recordings from home.
What was I saying? Oh, yes, I remember. Right now, if you get on British Airways, most of the people just have a quick briefing from the flight attendant, and they're air travelers. But you have dedicated professional crew. And if you look at Elon Musk's new vehicle, hopefully that's where they're headed the same way, where you've got dedicated professional crew, what may be under the category of astronauts, but crew, professional space flyers, and they will be the pilots and the operators of the vehicle. And then as the vehicles get safer and simpler and cheaper, then people will be able to fly in the back. I think that's happened on almost any high-speed transport, trains and airplanes, and it's going to happen with spaceflight. But we're just sort of in the early stages now, and I think it's natural and healthy.
Yeah, Chris, the scene, that wonderful scene in 2001: A Space Odyssey, where they're flying up to the rotating space station, and the stewardess is serving coffee or something, floating down into the cabin to serve coffee to the passenger in the shuttle going up to the space station. I mean, that scene is the epitome of what you just said. It's great.
It inspired me, absolutely. Yeah.
Helen.
Well, I was just thinking, even in the quite short term, it's likely that, from what I gather, it's likely that NASA as a space agency will probably only buy 4 seats on Crew Dragon, which means there's a possibility of another 3 people, or extra cargo, but 3 other people could fly. Now, it could be, if you're really rich, you could buy a seat and go as a tourist. It could be your research institute that chooses to buy that seat and send you. So I think it's this whole access to space. It will make it a bit cheaper, but it means that it's not just space agencies that are going to fly their astronauts. It could be all sorts of different organisations that suddenly have an opportunity to send their employee or employees into space. And that is a real game changer.
But I think, Helen, you're so right. It's like, and I want to be one of those employees that gets sent.
Do you miss it? I think you're all retired from spaceflight at the moment. Maybe it's a question to each of you. Do you miss it? And would you, if Elon called up, would you be straight on that Dragon?
I'd go. Yeah.
So start with Rusty actually, because you've been up for 50 years. Would you be on the Dragon if he asked?
Well, people always ask that question. Would you like to fly again? Blah blah blah. But my answer is always the same, which is that's for younger people. I've been there, done that, and more important than been there, done that is you need to have the opportunity. I mean, the beautiful thing about it is that yet another generation comes up. And, when I look at the world from my, senior age position, I really appreciate the phenomena of death. Thank heaven older people die and they get replaced by younger people. So I really think it's a young person's game. Thank heaven, and that's where it belongs.
I'd like to ask all of you actually to comment. I mean, we are all you're all astronauts. We're all space fans. You hear criticism about space flight. I mean, in some sense, I suppose the world that we find ourselves in now is not dissimilar to the world in 1968. Certainly, problems in America and so on. So how do you answer? Maybe I'll start with Helen and move across the panel. How do you answer the criticism that we should be focusing on the problems here on Earth, which are great, rather than spending our money and time and energy and imagination in space?
I think it's one of those things where it's a bit like saying, should we spend our money on education or health or defence? It's not an or, it's an and then we just have to juggle how much of each. With space, we can improve life on Earth. We're designing drugs based on protein crystals in a very simplistic sense. We can use remote sensing, and we can actually monitor now the temperature of the surface of the oceans, which we couldn't do had we not got satellites up there in the first place. So it's a useful vehicle to actually help us improve life back here on Earth, as well as, like Rusty said, it's just like being part of that future. Space is our future. It's not just improving life on Earth, but it will ultimately be our life off this planet. So I think it's lots of different facets to it all.
I totally agree with that. First of all, I say, and I'm not the originator of this, as most things that come out of my mouth usually, but, all the money that's spent in space, I mean, really, it's all of that is happening down here on Earth. I think that's an interesting thing to think about. We talk about, spending all this money in space. And what Helen said, I mean, when I flew to space the first time, my son was 7 years old. I would not have strapped on, and I believe all 3 of my colleagues here, this was a bigger thing than just the adventure of flying on a rocket ship, right? This, at least for me, I can say, was about feeling like knowing I was going to be part of something that's bigger than anything I could do myself, perhaps down here on the planet. And that it is all ultimately about improving life on Earth. Even when we talk about becoming a multiplanetary species, which I hope happens too, there's some aspect of that is about improving life here on Earth. And I think that's a really, really important thing to consider. And it's not just the science of what we're doing, but, use the International Space Station as this example, this really wonderful example of how we have discovered that we can live peacefully, successfully with people from, what is it, you guys, 15, 18, I can't remember, different countries coming together to work in this place, this mechanical life support system in space that we've built to mimic what Earth does for us naturally. And I personally believe the ultimate benefit is about improving life on Earth for all of us, and that it helps us reflect even more on how we should be behaving like crewmates here on Spaceship Earth.
Chris?
Yeah, I don't know when the right time in history is to do something magnificent. Like, how do you choose? And do you say, no, we can't do it this year, we should wait till next year or something, or wait until life on Earth is perfect before we attempt anything else? That's kind of ludicrous. There are almost 8 billion of us. Everybody's scheming and plotting and working and having inspiration and ideas and trying to solve problems in a new way. And that's a huge strength for our species. We need to do it in a thoughtful and global, responsible way. We need people to have that perspective. Elon Musk couldn't have existed 10 years ago with the things he's done. It's been the enabling technology that's allowed him to make that precision landing on the barge. You need three-dimensional positioning, you need high-speed computing, you have to understand hypersonic thermodynamics and everything else. Meanwhile, we are doing things that just a couple decades ago were impossible. And as astronauts, we also sort of become the face of the space agencies. And so we deal with people from all around the world. On social media, talk to millions of people on a regular basis. People need to be inspired by something that's greater than what's on their immediate horizons. We need it fundamentally. It's what allows you to imagine who you might be later in your life. And then the last piece is people complain about, oh, it's so expensive. But I've never met anyone who has complained about the cost of spaceflight who actually knows how much it costs. There's a perception, but you have to put it into comparison to what we're spending on everything else. And then you can start to make an actual rational judgment as to whether this is a right little portion of our GDP that we ought to be spending. And, I spent my whole life in it. I'm convinced it's the right thing for our species and the planet. That's why I worked at it my whole life.
Hey, Chris, I wanted to pick up on something that you said right there at the beginning. I thought that was really great. When is the right time to do something fantastic in history? And as most of you know, I've used the metaphor of birth for a model for thinking of the future. And I was just thinking when you said that when it comes to birth per se, it's automatic. It's 9 months, man. That's the right time. It happens. And to a certain extent, I think that our move out into space is like that automatic 9-month period gestation. And mom may be doing all kinds of things during pregnancy, but 9 months, I'm going to be out there, and I think that's where we are. Now, the next part, though, is what's really important, I think, for us today. And that is, once we get out, once we are born, then over time, gradually, we begin to, of necessity, assume more and greater responsibility for ourselves, our evolution, and where we're going. And I think that's the moment that we find ourselves in today. So to me, it's a great question, Brian, to ask. And I don't think, as everybody else has been saying, I don't think money has much to do with it at all. It's just a mechanism.
There's an optimism across the panel, it seems, that we're talking about larger and larger numbers of people going into space. And as you said, passengers, basically, not merely people who are working. And this is what originally the idea of this show was, to talk about isolation. But thankfully, we've got 50 minutes in without getting anywhere near there. So I'm going to attempt it now. But I'm fascinated when we talk, for instance, about that first human mission to Mars. And that is so different to anything else that any astronaut or cosmonaut has experienced, because, even as far as the moon, you have a certain number of days and you should be able to get back. When you're talking about 3 years, when you're talking about that 18-month point of being away from the Earth, what do you think are those psychological issues of isolation and distance from other humanity that are going to be the biggest problems of that? Nicole, if I can start with you.
when we go further away from our planet, right? And we're thinking about these psychological things. And the thing, and you mentioned it, that's going to be so different for us is there's going to be that line in time, that place in space where we don't see Earth out the window anymore, right? We don't have that very visceral visual connection to our home anymore. And I think that's where things like painting on your iPad or playing your guitar on the iPad or whatever the instrument, the holodeck, hopefully that would be nice, whatever it is that allows us, to do those human things that connect us to home is where it's going to be the biggest deal. We'll figure out food. I think we'll figure out radiation even. It might be the little sponge thing or what, it's going to be very different. I think it's definitely not going to be what we do on space station. We couldn't support it, but I think it's more that loss of connection, visual, colorful, glowing connection to Earth. That's going to be the big deal.
Can I just say, I'd add to that really, I agree it is, it is the vast distance and that the fact that we may not even be able to see Earth at some point. But I think it's because we are used to being so connected that we can hardly imagine life without, which is why suddenly, being isolated from a lot of our friends and family because we're so used to being with them and, being in very busy, buzzing places in the society, it's hard when we take that away. But when I was in space, it was at a time when we could only talk to mission control, talk to the ground at all, really, when we were over the Soviet Union. And most of that was really over Russia, because then when we were around the other side of the Earth, so from 2/3 of the orbit, we were out of contact with mission control. Now, we had an amateur radio station, so if somebody in the middle of the Australian outback just happened to be listening in, then we might have a bit of a chat with them. But basically, the only connection we had formally with the ground was about 1/3 of the orbit, 30 minutes or so over the old Soviet Union. And actually, the other side then, it was peaceful because we didn't have mission control so yabbering on us as do this, do the other, don't forget this, oh, repeat that one, by the way, it was peaceful. We could get on with it, but we got on with it, I suppose, knowing that within 60 minutes or so we'd be back round with another contact. So I think it's a question of the training for the Martian crews, getting them used to that period of isolation. So and the gap in their contact, it could be 20 odd minutes to get a communication from Mars to Earth, and then another 20 odd minutes going back to Mars when Earth and Mars are in their furthest apart. So I think that's a different way of working, but it's not insurmountable, and they're not going to be on their own. They will be together. So as long as they're a strong crew to really support each other, and they know that the end is in sight at some point in 18 months after they launch, they can return to Earth. If you've got an end in sight as well, I think that really helps.
A little like COVID-19. If you have the vision that the end is in sight, it's easier to deal with it.
I think there was the artist Louis Buñuel once said, solitude is perfect, just as long as you know you're going to have someone to talk to about it afterwards. And I think, if you are going to be that person going to Mars, you think, well, okay, the Mars trip, there's only going to be a few of us here for 3 years, but after this, I'm going to get invited to every single party. When I'm back, should we get the woman who went to Mars? Let's get the woman who went to Mars. Let's invite her around,
Chris, what are your thoughts on the challenges? I suppose, as Helen said, and Nicole said, you're close to the Earth on the space station. Ridiculously close, actually. I think it's about 100 miles, isn't it, or so, 120 miles. You can come back in a few minutes. What do you say? You hop in the Soyuz and press a button, and down you go. How roughly, how different will it be psychologically on a Mars mission?
When I was actually on board the space station, I saw it in a bunch of different ways. And, it was just a busy daily cycle. But I also looked at it as a little microcosm of humanity. I looked at my ship, when I was the commander, looking around. These are the confines of my ship. And you're right, you have the omnipresent, beautiful world constantly there in the window. It's very reassuring. It's also very mentally stimulating. It's this wonderful permanent kaleidoscope of discovery beside you. And then I pictured if I could just fire the engines for 10 minutes and get going fast enough to leave, what that was going to be like. And I decided that if that happened, as I think Nicole said, as the Earth gets small enough that now you don't have it out the window again, I would then get my crew together and say, okay, folks, we are no longer Earthlings. We are now Martians. You need to change your entire mental framework of who you are. And I think it's something maybe a lot of folks have discovered in COVID. You can't be in love with your old life. You can't say that the patterns that I found pleasure in, that have dominated the way that I behaved in my culture for the last however many years, you have to say to yourself, okay, that has stopped, and now we're doing something different. And we need to see ourselves fundamentally differently. Otherwise, there's no way you're going to stay psychologically healthy. If your whole motivation of staying happy on Mars is the day you get back to Earth, then you're not going to make it. You know, you're going to have to change what gives you pleasure and what gives you satisfaction. So to me, it's going to take a certain type of person to be able to be successful at it. But boy, we really need those guitars on the spaceship. And if you can have a holodeck, something that can, almost all of us are reading more in COVID, that chance to, with your own imagination, escape from the confines of whatever your particular life is. That's vital to human mental health. And so we really need to think about that as well. It's going to be a wildly different existence for the first people, even just living on the moon, where you're not just there for a finite period, but eventually as far as Mars, where, as you say, it's maybe you're never coming back. That's just going to take a whole different mindset. It's different than normal life.
I think it's so cool what you said too, Chris, is that, about needing to have the guitars, is that, if you think about it, from the very beginning of humans in space, there has been art, there has been music. I mean, every step of the way. And I just love thinking about it, how, and we've done a really good, and I speak for NASA really, is like, NASA does a really great job speaking to the people that already love NASA and what we do in space and that kind of thing. But I think it's these ways that we put the human in human spaceflight that allows us to engage with even more people about it, to, make that connection again. And I think those same kinds of things are going to be happening when we go off to Mars and, somebody's playing the guitar, doing a cover of some song. I don't know what it might be, but
something by Bowie.
It's going to make that connection. It's going to make that human connection to what's happening in that place.
Nicole, I love that thought, and I want to extrapolate it to that initial scene in Star Wars in the bar scene, right? Because when we get out there and we do have that federation of sentient beings, meeting, it's going to be all kinds of art and song and rhythm and drinks. And, I think that this is what's happening now. We are beginning to have this vision that as we move out, we are Earth people. We're not Americans or Brits or Russians or whatever. We're people from Earth moving out. And even our organization, the Association of Space Explorers, we all feel that, even though it's a little bit hard to talk about. But that, to me, is going to be a wonderful thing. And all that art behind you on the walls, there are going to be hundreds of representations of that. And what's fun is the idea that we're going to bring, Chris's song or your art or whatever it is, out there with us. So I love the idea that we today are responsible for the culture that we are going to evolve into space with and contribute to it. And I can't wait. I mean, the imagination of what it's going to be like in that bar scene out of Star Wars is just great.
Maybe that's where we all travel back to space. All of us. Let's all go.
Yeah.
You've sold it to me. I'm in.
Yeah, we just have to make sure that we're attractive enough to be invited as well, because there might be that thing where have we had that invite yet to the conference of the sentient beings of this galaxy? I wonder why they've left us off the list. I don't know. I know. I just want to ask Nicole about this, because when we were talking about, the great bringing together of human beings, and sometimes during any social media is sometimes quite divisive as well. And Nicole, you were involved, weren't you, in the first Twitter connection in space?
Well, it's kind of weird. I was involved with Jeff Williams in the first tweet up, what we called a tweet up from space, which was actually engaging with people who are very active on Twitter on the ground, right? I think, Chris, tell me if I'm wrong. I think Massimino was the first one to do a tweet from the shuttle or one of his space flights.
I think so, yeah.
And of course, you were the master from Space Station with that. You taught all the rest of us how to really engage through that medium. But yeah, it's kind of cool how I look at social media as this platform for positive, for inspiration, for a way to uplift, and it makes me so sad to see that not the way it is. It really does. But
no names mentioned.
And it's not just about. But I think it's another case where if you look at what is presented from astronauts from space on social media, there is always something positive and uplifting about it. There's always something that ultimately is about who we are as human beings, the really very awesome things that we're doing off the planet, for the planet. And I think it allows people to think about their own future in a way that they might not have before, and in a positive way. Yeah.
Can I just congratulate you, Rusty, by the way? Never has the phrase "no names" so clearly named an individual as it did just then. That was quite brilliant. I suppose because we are nearly at the end, and as usual, there's so much we haven't covered. Who would have imagined we wouldn't be able to cover all of space exploration in 45 minutes? But Helen, I want to start with you. It's interesting when we've been talking about. Sometimes there are people who are critical of the idea of space exploration, but all of you I know go out and talk to so many people. And I wondered, Helen, what have you found have been those bridges to sometimes people who've been resistant about the idea of space exploration? Have you found that certain stories, certain ideas are the ones where you can then see sometimes a cynical audience, their eyes light up and go, yes?
Yeah, I suppose if we're talking about adults rather than young people, because younger people are just, they know it's their future, and that there is no doubt. I can't think of one young person who I've spoken to, even in a big audience, who hasn't already had this idea that, yes, space is relevant and exciting. But I think for adults who can be a bit more, perhaps, a bit more sceptical about the whole thing, I think it's the idea that we have always explored. Humans, all organisms actually always explore. In fact, Arthur C. Clarke said that when an organism ceases to explore, it starts to die. And I think when people start to think about that and realise, well, yes, now we have, there's parts of the Earth I know we haven't actually been to, and depths of the sea and all that. We say we know more about the surface of the moon than we do some of the deepest parts of the ocean. But nonetheless, the next part of Earth really to explore is upwards. We've been in the skies. Or mountains we did a number of years ago, and space is the next frontier. That's where we're going. That's the bit to explore. Our nearest neighbour, the moon, and then on to Mars, and just generally explore other parts. And whether whether exploring with our telescopes, so visibly what we can see, whether it's exploring with knowledge actually as well, and just pushing forward the frontiers of our understanding through research and learning, or if it's that actual physical exploration. I think it's just all part of this natural desire to explore, and it's a thing that that all organisms actually do, and that's, I think, what makes people often realise it's just something that we have to do it. It will prove life on Earth, but it will also be part of our future.
Yeah, it reminds me of when you were saying about the Arthur C. Clarke quote. I think in a show we did a few series ago, we talked about the sea squirt, and a creature which eventually finds a place where it goes, I'm comfortable here, now I can eat my own brain. And we kind of want to avoid getting so comfortable we go, I don't need this anymore, do I? This curiosity can go in this pudding
Robin,
bowl now, can't it?
Steve Jones, the great biologist, always says about that sea squirt, he says it dissolved its own brain. It finds a place, it will always be, dissolved its own brain. That's known as tenure. Yeah. It's like every emeritus professor knows that.
I think we've sadly run out of time, which is I hope we can do this again. We had a question for the audience as well today, which obviously we put up on social media, and they've replied. And we asked the audience, what do you most hope that we find on Mars when humans land there? So, Brian, what have you got there?
Well, as we're a non-political show, I'll read out Daniel Court's, an optician. Travelling to Mars is the only sensible way to check your eyesight. I don't know if in the US you know what that's a reference to. But,
Richard Waters says that what he hopes to find is my bloody car keys.
We've got this one from ST Gavalot. Said, and it reminds me of Carl Sagan. I think it was Carl Sagan. He says, a preemptive eviction notice due to our poor reference from the current landlord. I think, was it Carl Sagan who said that's what we're tenants on the earth, and ultimately we'll answer. I think it was Carl Sagan. Anyway, not a great anecdote, is it? When I can't remember. The end.
I would love it if this is actually where the show ends. This shows how long we've been. We've reached an age now. We've been doing this show for 12 years.
Robin,
was it Carl Sagan? I can't remember. Maybe it was Isaac Asimov.
Let me remind.
No.
Let me remind you. I have tenure. I'll just remind you.
But we've got Yorkshire Tom hopes that we find some common sense there. Ollie Thomas hopes his odd socks are there. They've got to be somewhere. And Nick just hopes that it really does have a delicious nougat core. So thank you very much to our panel, Nick Oldstock, Chris Hadfield, Helen Sharman and Rusty Schweikar. And what are we up to, Brian?
Next week, we're looking at the sun.
No, not directly, of course, because that's very, very dangerous. So don't. This is, again, we have to be careful in terms of litigation. And in fact, it is true that Brian and I have a very different relationship with the sun. When we were on tour, whenever we were in sunny places, Brian would normally put on Factor 10 and put a bit of lemon in his hair, and I normally kept my duffel coat on. And that is true, isn't it? That is the difference between
Genuinely
us.
true. We got off a plane at Los Angeles. In Los Angeles, and he walked out with a rucksack full of books and a duffel coat. They'd never seen anything like it.
Well, unfortunately, the movie Paddington hadn't come out yet. Otherwise, I'd have been absolutely surrounded by people. Thanks very much for listening, everyone. Bye-bye.
In the infinite monkey cage. Till now, nice again.
Hello, I'm Robin Ince.
And I'm Brian Cox, and this is the Infinite Monkey Cage, and we are floating in space. I mean, we're not, but it's radio, so imagine.
We can be. Imagine we're floating in space. Now, as listeners probably know anyway, regular listeners will know that basically we cooked up the ruse of this show predominantly to meet astronauts. We pretend we're interested in other things. Obviously, we've done shows about bats and flies and black holes and infinity, why pandas are overrated, the psychic abilities of fungi, whether crows are cleverer than physicists. But basically all of that is just a ruse so we can meet astronauts and Brian can wear his hand-stitched Space 1999 costume.
Hang on a minute, the psychic abilities of fungi. Mm-hmm. Or are crows cleverer than physicists? I don't remember.
I remember
that
the crow show. I was on that crow show and you set that crow on me. You put stuff near me that it liked and then made it find it and didn't tell me, and I was absolutely terrified.
Yeah. But you wouldn't remember those shows, Brian, anyway, because sometimes we do make the shows without you because you've got a busy schedule. So what we do is we just have the kind of offcuts of things that you normally say and drop them in. So if we do something like, do fungi have psychic powers? I go, Brian won't be interested. We'll just drop him saying, it seems remarkable that a species capable of questioning its very existence in the universe.
Well, should also taste excellent with pan-fried garlic.
Yeah, that is the line that we put into the panda episode. You got a lot of letters of complaint, but we didn't show you any of those. Other lines we often drop in, including, accordingly, the sun has a Schwarzschild radius of approximately 3 kilometres. And obviously also, get that crow away from me. I have such pretty eyes. So yeah, those are normally the things that we just drop in.
On our first show about space exploration, we were joined by Brian Blessed, who famously asked,
We haven't gone to Mars! Why haven't we gone to Mars? Tell me, Brian, I want to go to Mars!
And having not really answered that question, in part due to the sheer violence with which it was posed, we thought we'd revisit space and ask, what do we learn when we venture out, as the great Carl Sagan put it, beyond the shores of the cosmic ocean?
As we look back at what we leave behind, do we begin to truly understand its fragility? To discuss this, we are joined by 2 astronauts, a planetary scientist, and someone who is almost certain that they would have definitely been an astronaut if they hadn't just gone into other directions of writing books about dirty dancing. And they are...
Hi, everyone. My name is Nicole Stott. I am a retired NASA astronaut. though still hopeful to fly in space again someday, an aquanaut, artist, now author, and most importantly, a mom. And I think the most remarkable thing we've discovered by going into space is the reality of who and where we are in space together. And for the sake of all life we share our planet with, that we all need to figure out how to behave like crewmates, not passengers here on Spaceship Earth. The short answer.
And nobody wants to go after Nicole. Hi, I'm Chris Hadfield. I'm also an astronaut. I'm a Canadian Space Agency astronaut who served with NASA for 21 years. I've done a lot of things since then. I'm writing my 5th book right now and done some TV series and working with some space companies. But I think the most remarkable thing that we've discovered by venturing out into space, or at least one of the things that I found fascinating, is we discovered where the moon came from, and the fact that it was torn violently from the Earth itself almost 4.5 billion years ago, and that in fact we are, siblings, the two of us together orbiting for the last 4.5 billion years together. And we had to go there and pick up the rocks and bring them back to know that for certain.
I am Carolyn Porco, and I've spent my professional career exploring planets with robotic spacecraft. And I think one of the greatest discoveries we've made in going into space is what we found on the small moon Enceladus with its habitable subsurface ocean spraying into space, one of the best places in the solar system to go to search for life. But another thing we have gained from going into space, and I'm going to repeat more or less what Nicole said, she got it on the money, and that is seeing that uncorrupted, unpoliticized visual of all of us together on one tiny little dot of a planet, and what that means for the significance of all of life on Earth.
I'm Katie Brand, and I'm a writer and a comedian, and I did indeed once do a live stand-up show called I Could Have Been an Astronaut, because I am a potential astronaut, I guess, in the sense that everyone is a potential astronaut if they're not dead. So in that sense, I could have been an astronaut. I think the most remarkable thing for me, I've been thinking about this, is what we've learned from going into space is that everything in space takes such a long time. Now, I know that's not very scientific, but I was just thinking, before there was space travel and an understanding of astronomical time, people's own perception of time must have just been really their own lifetime, or perhaps their father or their grandfather. And they think, well, oh yes, that elephant's really old. That elephant's been before I was even born. Or that tree has been there. My father told me that tree was there when he was little. And we're talking about maybe 100 or 200 years. And that would have been for a long time what most people's perception of a long time was, perhaps. And now it's just exploded all of our minds what astronomical time actually means. And since I really understood that, I've never been the same. Can you tell?
This is our panel! I love that, Katie. I love that what has been learnt most from space exploration is that elephants aren't as old as you might have at first imagined. Yes. I think that is you've got to check the rings around their knees. They're like trees. That's how you do it.
I thought you were expressing surprise that elephants are not as old as the universe.
Well, I wasn't expressing my own surprise. I feel like, although I am not great at physics, I've got beyond that. I just meant more that our own perspective as humans on Earth about time has now become something that we can understand in astronomical terms, rather than just being earthbound by organic matter being there and then dying or something like that. You know what I mean? It's just, that just blows my mind a bit, really. Just the huge change in human perception since we went into space and fully understood that.
Katie, one of the things on the space station that really surprised me was it gave me a sense of how old the world was. Going around it so many times, you can see the ancient scars and how the continents used to fit together. And for the first time in my life, I thought I actually palpably got an intuitive sense of what 4 billion might actually mean. Yeah. And I wasn't expecting to get that experience from it. So the direct astronaut experience tends to reinforce the thing that you've been thinking about.
Well, what about, though, I presume when you were in space, were you able to see the elephants on the other side of the Earth keep it steady? Because I know there's been a big cover-up on those elephants and the turtles underneath.
I have to, can I just add something here to what Chris said? I don't think you really have to go into space to get that kind of visceral understanding. I've taken pictures of bodies in space, and examination of photographs actually can do the same. You don't get the physical. I don't know what it's like to float in space, but that understanding of just how ancient things are by looking at the tectonics and the geological processes and so on other planets does a very similar thing.
And did you experience that, and Chris as well, and all of you, like, did you experience that as a kind of gut punch? Like, how did you actually feel inside when that moment hit you, like Chris just described? Because I've been slightly depressed about it, to be honest.
Actually, it made me eternally optimistic because the Earth has been here. I suddenly could see, with nobody filtering anything, that the Earth has been here uninterrupted for 4.5 billion years, and there has been life on Earth uninterrupted for 4 of those 4.5 billion years. So the Earth is tough as nails, and life is so tenacious. And we can get all wrapped up in the current events, be they good or horrible, and think that this is the only moment that's ever existed. But life, we could not eliminate all the life on Earth if we tried our damnedest. Life is tough, and I found that reassuring. This little elephant's length life that we're going, it's important to us, but in the big scheme of things, it's just a momentary blip.
That's what George Carlin, the great US stand-up, used to talk about when people would say, save the planet. And he said, the planet's going to be fine. They're talking about themselves, not the planet. By the way, I apologise to our producer, Sash, because all she does every single episode is hope that we ask the first question. That's the first thing that happens. And it never happens. I heard elephants, and I went, we have to deal with the elephants before we get to question 1.
The elephant in the room.
You just put it right out there.
But Nicole, I was just, that sensation, because you are of a very, small group of human beings, to be able to look back on the planet Earth. Do you remember the experience, the first moment you really had time? Because obviously you're concentrating on a lot of things when you're going up to the ISS. There's not time to kind of just, browse what's behind you. But that point when you first could look out of the window and see the planet Earth, what was that sensation like?
Yeah, Chris, I think you'll agree that we all, remember that moment in some way. For me, it was the chance to float out of my seat in the space shuttle and get to whatever window it was. I think it was an overhead one on the flight deck for me, and just be in awe. First of all, I remember floating there and thinking, "Oh my gosh, I'm here. I'm alive. This is a good thing." And then, wow, I should look out the window. And looking out the window, and it's just so overwhelmingly, impressively beautiful, glowing, all those colors we know Earth to be, all those things. I will say I didn't activate my brain cell to say, ooh, I should remember where I'm looking at when I've looked out the window the first time. I know there was water. I know there was a little bit of land. There were clouds, but it was
You're looking at all of it, aren't you?
I think you're looking at, kind of a horizon to horizon view. And I think just being overwhelmed by the presence of it, like, oh my gosh, we live on a planet kind of thing when you're looking out the window. I mean, we know that when we're in kindergarten. And you're right, Carolyn, we don't have to go to space to know that kind of thing, and we can see it in other ways. But I don't know, there's just something really special about it coming in through your eyes, getting into your heart and your mind, and appreciating that way. And then every single time afterwards. And I'll tell you, I'm equally as impressed, Cassini, Carolyn, with that picture, those images we get back, and you're learning all about Saturn and those rings, and then the one that at least for me is the most impressive, that little dot of light below those rings where we make that connection to ourself again. And it's so important. I got goosebumps. I get thinking about that all the time.
Well, Carolyn, I wanted to ask you about that because you've been involved in, I think, 2 of the most iconic images of all time, certainly from the Voyager mission. There's a very famous pale blue dot image, the Earth from 4 billion miles away, I think.
Oh, beyond the orbit of Neptune.
Yeah, so. And then the Cassini image that Nicole referred to. And it is interesting to me that of all those beautiful images of Saturn and its rings, magnificent images, the one that really does elicit the most powerful emotional reaction is probably the least spectacular one, in a sense, because it's that point of light. So could you talk about those 2 iconic images of Earth from a very long way away?
When I first was showing that to audiences as I was going around giving lectures, I showed the pale blue dot because that was the initial look of Earth from space from afar. It never failed to bring gasps. I was involved in that with Carl Sagan, and his idea was basically to just take the pictures that were taken from the Apollo mission of the Earth from space, and just extend that concept and show people what it looked like from the outer solar system. And like you said, it was a ragged picture. It really was, but that wasn't the most significant thing about that picture. It was what Carl Sagan had to say about it, and the way that he romanced it and turned it into an allegory on the human condition that ever since made that phrase, pale blue dot. It's become a meme. It's a meme in our culture. It immediately signifies a sense of brotherhood, of being on this small little planet, and a sense of responsibility to take care of this web of life that we are intimately embedded in.
You know, Katie, I think you alluded to it right at the start. That it's a complex set of emotions that contemplating our place in the universe raises. Because at one level, as you said, the sheer timescales, the physical insignificance of our world might make us feel just that, insignificant and irrelevant. And yet, at the same time, as Nicole, Chris, and Carolyn all described beautifully, there's a profound sense of value. What's your feeling of what that complex mix of emotions signifies?
Yeah, I mean, as I've said before on this show, and, you know, my mathematical ability is very low for various reasons, teaching and sort of slightly odd maths arrangements early in Catholic school where we just did art and Jesus. And I was good at art and Jesus. I'm still good at drawing.
It should have just come to you then.
Yeah. Yeah, we were often told how insignificant we were, but for other reasons. But I think the difference of emotions I've had, especially over the last year or two over lockdown, I got into some of this stuff. And, you know, after shows that I've done with you, try to grapple a bit more with quantum physics and try to really understand it. And what I felt was excited by the idea that there were ultimate truths out there that people in the world who study these things are really trying to get at, and they're not afraid of the truths, the underlying truths of existence and how space works, and on a quantum level, on a classic level, all of that. But so I sort of broached it with this incredible fascination for, like, wow, this could be really about what is the true stuff of life. This is incredible. And then I think I glimpsed out of the corner of my eye for a very brief second an understanding of what this all meant. And I instantly became really terrified at the seriousness and the hugeness of it, of how, you know, quantum physics might actually work and how that affects how I perceive my life on Earth and how I perceive everything, how we all perceive each other. Is anything real? Does anything matter? I went through all these emotions, you know, sort of in about 20 minutes. And then I carried on reading, carried on being excited by it, came in and out of understanding. And I did feel thrilled and uplifted, but also deeply unsettled and worried. And I got quite upset for a bit because I thought, nothing I know is real. Nothing I know makes sense anymore. Nothing, you know, nothing matters, as you say. But then a new thought came to me.
I didn't say that.
I mean, I wasn't saying you were directly saying nothing in my life has any value. But I think I settled on a new idea, which has been an idea that I've had now that I think is carrying me through the next stage of my life, which is, I think all of this tells me that we should value every single second of our own life on Earth, and that finding pleasure in life is the most important thing. Pleasure and beauty and truth, whatever forms they may come in. And you know, I really took that on board, and, you know, obviously I had to go off and have a quick Bounty bar to calm down. And then I thought, you know what? Just have another one. That's what the message is.
See, you haven't gone that far away from your Catholic education. You're still looking for the taste of paradise, aren't you? It's just paradise has changed from the ethereal to the coconutty. That's all. Chris, you put together a beautiful book of the images that you took from the ISS. And I wondered how you felt, you know, over 3 missions, you know, was there a changing relationship to your view of the Earth? Because, you know, there's so many different ways that you were able to look at the Earth and to experience, you know, different landscapes. And as you said, also to be able to measure things which we are not able to measure when we are down, you know, when our feet are planted on the Earth. How did that relationship with the Earth change over that time?
The first glance out the window was like Nicole said, and it's overwhelming. I was on the space shuttle and was looking at the overhead window just minutes after we'd gotten to orbit. And what I found was I couldn't see fast enough for the amount and variety of things that were in front of me. And so all I could see was what I expected to see, the things that were familiar to me. And we were coming across London. And I remember having this overpowering urge to grab one of the other astronauts and go, look, there's London. I used to live in London. That's London right there. London, me. Because I realized I was just trying to rationalize this onslaught that was coming in through my eyes. But the next time around the world, I spotted London and, and there's Paris. And you could see, wow, all the way to Hamburg and all the way to Rome, just looking out the window. And then the next time around, I'm looking for the Isle of Wight broken off. And the next time around, hey, Stonehenge must be just over here somewhere. And what it felt like was a growing intimacy with the world, like a better understanding of the reality of the planet. And every single orbit was instructional. And I got better at looking at it and how to look back into the glint of the sun so you could see where the water was reflected, or get ready for a moonrise where it looks like this bulge of the earth suddenly gives birth to a little egg of the moon as it pops out from behind the planet. And I went around 2,650 times or so. And even the last orbit, I was just maybe a little bit like Katie. I was just treasuring the gorgeousness of it and trying not to miss it, recognizing that just how privileged I was to see the world that way.
Nicole, what about, I'm interested, you were saying, you do hope to go into space again, but that feeling as you go round for the last time, when you know that you are about to return, I imagine that, the last time that you really get the chance to look out of the window, do you find every single one of your senses as at a kind of a peak at that point of going, right, this is the last time I might get this view?
I think it probably is heightened. I don't know if I was really aware of it at the time, but I feel like, I love what Chris just said about kind of this evolution of how you experienced what you were seeing out the window, because I think it's all about relationship, right? Chris, when you said that, looking out the window, London, you're trying to find some, Katie's word, truth in it. Like, how do I connect to that? How do I relate to this? And the same thing is true for Carolyn, for your image of that, smiling Earth under the rings of Saturn. We want to get a better sense of who and where we are, together in the universe. And I'll tell you, I think, Robin, I shared this story with you before, Cam, but I have this vivid memory, National Geographic pullout in the middle of a space issue. It was I think they described it as, this is the poster of the known universe or the observable universe. And it was this oval drawing on a white sheet of paper. And I still, to this day, my mind is boggled by that, in that, okay, so what's all that white stuff around that oval? Is that the unknown universe? Is that what they've been telling me infinity is? Look, it must go out my window of my bedroom. In some ways, that's what we're all about, trying to figure out, how does that oval expand, and what is all that white stuff? And it's kind of our mission to do that and understand that relationship, and then really come back to the Earth with the understanding of who and where we are. And I'm hopeful that everyone every day wakes up thinking about the idea that, oh my gosh, I'm on a planet, I'm spinning at 1,000 miles an hour, and oh my God, it just takes care of me. And what do I need to do to preserve this life support system for all life that I share the planet with? I think it's like these big, expanding, I can't even imagine solving the problem ideas to, okay, we know we're on a planet in this place. What do we do with that information? And how do we make sure we make life as good as possible for everyone here?
Carolyn.
There is a way for people to have a very similar experience to what Chris and Nicole have described. And I think it's when you go out on a moonless night, you have a dark sky and you see the Milky Way. And if you can bring yourself to look at the Milky Way and appreciate what you actually are looking at, which is this utterly, staggeringly gigantic disk of stars, and you are on a planet, and chances are you're at some random latitude, so it's not, flat to you, it's coming up at some angle. And if you really think about it and try hard, you can get it to pop, and you can get that visceral feeling like, oh my God, I'm on a planet, and it makes you almost want to hold on because you feel like you're going to fall off. And when that happens, if I see some of you nodding yes, it's a fabulous experience. And it's why, for me, the night sky is so precious, and I don't want anybody messing it up. Because, no, I mean it, because there's all sorts of reasons why it could get messed up. And there's a big one now I won't go into that I'm very upset about. But the night sky is the only sight that you can lay your eyes on that is 13.8 billion years old. And it really is another way to have that sense of perspective. You know, when things get me really down, I go out on a dark sky and I look at the sky and I just think, wow, this is what matters. You know, evolutionary biologists tell us that the chances of any one of us actually having been birthed into life are incredibly, infinitesimally small. And we won the lottery. Those of us who actually have life have won the lottery. That really matters. Just to be joyous that you are alive, that we are all alive. Yeah. And that's my sermon for today.
Art and Jesus.
Art Jesus.
I wanted to ask, Caroline, I think you were referring to the in part to the commercialization of space, certainly the launching of large numbers of satellites up there, which could damage our view of the night sky and be profoundly important if that happened. I wanted to ask you, just explore the idea of commercial spaceflight, because one of the arguments that is often advanced is that the more people that can experience what astronauts experience, the more people that can experience seeing the Earth from space, the better our world will be. It's often said. So one of the arguments for space tourism is that more and more people can be exposed to that feeling. Do you have any sympathy with that, Chris and Nicole? That idea that if we could all experience personally what you've experienced, or as many of us as possible, or the alternative, I suppose, is more along the lines of, as Caroline has explained so eloquently, that actually just contemplating the night sky, seeing it from the surface of the Earth, and receiving these ideas and thinking about them is enough.
I think there are people who walk through a redwood forest and will start crying just because they get an intuitive understanding of what they're seeing. And then there are other people who are, going to leave their luncheon wrappers just, trailing behind them because they just have a different mentality or a different view of nature and their own place in it. And I don't think the mere act of flying in space is going to fundamentally change those individuals' natures. You have to have a desire to be able to experience it and to absorb it. And so it's not instantaneous. It's not guaranteed. But I also think, on the contrary, if everyone spent their life within 100 yards of where they were born, they would not understand the world at all. And the ability to travel freely away from the place where you're born and try and personally experience the world is immensely educational. And aviation has allowed that. And space travel is just now starting to allow that. We need to regulate it. Just like we did with aviation 100 years ago. We need to bring in rules. We need to see how that fits into society. But I think fundamentally, it will find its place in amongst all the other human experiences to help flesh out our understanding of where we fit in the universe.
Nicole?
Yeah, and I just echo everything that Chris just said, and I wish anybody who wanted to could experience that. But I also think that, there's so much more to the commercial side of it that I don't think that's what we're trying to get at now in terms of, the overall motivation of lifting industrial things off the planet, allowing us to, turn Earth into more of the paradise that we'd all like it to be, by utilizing space that way. But I feel like what you said, and I would say, Katie, is something we have to look for everywhere. I mean, I try to find it when I'm sitting out in my backyard now, or looking out the window, or hanging out with my dogs, or not even the night sky, but standing in the dirt and looking up at the blue sky, right? And thinking, oh my gosh, we look up and it looks like that blue goes on forever, and it seems like it's just doing its thing. And we know from that view we've had from space with our own eyes and with our robots that is a veil thin layer of blue. And so how do we, bring that into our consciousness and our daily lives? And I also think that, wouldn't it be nice right now? And Chris, I don't know about your crew. I have to imagine this happened at least once or more, because it did with us, and I've heard it from others, is that, man, if we could just toss those leaders we have, into the space station right now with their little heads bouncing off each other, floating in front of the cupola window, I think the negotiation, the reality would be very different than what we're experiencing.
I'm going to take a different view of this. I was, before it actually started to happen, I was a big promoter of this idea of commercial interest taking over the exploration of space. But the way I'm seeing it unfold now is extremely disappointing to me and disheartening because, and maybe, it was just inevitable because commercial interests care about profits. That's their bottom line, is profits. And they market. They always, they want to market things and make it seem like it's more this than it really is, whatever this is. And marketing and science, which is what, I'm interested in. And really, Nicole, what you're talking about is you want people to be educated about the scientific aspect of where we live, right? Which is to say, or the geographical, however you want to put it. Just really understand exactly what you're looking at when you see a blue sky, what it really means. Okay, that can be addressed by education and, making people aware. And like Chris said, some people will receive it and some people don't. I think some leaders you could put up in the space station, I'm not so sure that they would be so overwhelmed. And so getting back to my horror of what's going on with commercial space, I think marketing and science make terrible bedfellows because one is all about spin and the other is all about deconstructing spin. And to me, we should go to explore space to have a greater understanding of the nature of our solar system, our planets, how ancient the Earth is, and all these things, and understanding more about the processes that go on other planets so that we can be better custodians of our own. And then the whole idea, again, there's another aspect of this, which is what's happening in low Earth orbit with a plan for 100,000 commercial satellites. And there's no regulations in place for it, and they're going to ruin the night sky because you won't be able to go out and not see crisscrossing artificial lights. And that to me is our birthright. That's what we Earthlings, we deserve that. It belongs to all of us. They don't have a right to trash it like we've already trashed the oceans.
So, Chris and Nicole, would you like to pick up on those thoughts?
I think if there's anything that human history has taught us is that it's going to continue to move forward and it's going to be accelerated by technological capability. That's not going to stop. Human behavior is not going to stop. And so then it needs to be really heavily discussed, and almost always regulations are written in as an after effect. A lot of laws were written after certain societal rules were exceeded. But there are lots of examples on Earth. No human being had gotten to New Zealand until about 800 years ago, and no human being had gotten to Antarctica until about 110 years ago. And we have learned so much, if we look at Antarctica, a tremendous amount from the thousands of people that live on that continent. It's added to the human understanding of our planet and the universe. And so there are ways to do it, and they're never going to be perfect. And I mean, I'm the chair of the board of the Open Lunar Foundation, which is purely looking at what should the rules be as the first people start staying longer and longer on the moon, and whose laws should we live by, and what regulations do we need to anticipate, and can we take the best of our societal rules and see if we can start over, not just technologically, but sociologically on the moon. So you just can't stop the forward march of human behavior. I think the really important thing is get out and talk about it and try and get the rules established as early as you can that allow this meet as many human objectives as possible.
I'm just going to bring in Katie quickly because I just wondered about, I suppose when I was travelling around recently, a lot of people, when they were talking about the kind of private finance space missions, they did feel that they were uncertain of what the real objectives were. That the big objective seemed to be, look, we're going into space. But a lot of people felt, the ones I spoke to anyway, they were worried this was an ego thing.
For me, what sort of slightly freaked me out was it seemed to happen so suddenly. Perhaps I've taken my eye off the ball or something, but it felt like a very short hop in my lifetime between going into space being something that only a very, very tiny percentage of humans would ever do, and they would have to go through rigorous tests of every kind, and then it would be a very dangerous mission to go up there, and it would be really touch and go if they could come back down and all of this sort of stuff. And that was my whole life up to like 5 minutes ago, where suddenly celebrities were going up for the weekend. And I just feel like there was no bridging bit in between where like anyone explained how we got from that to that. And it seems crazy to me that people are just sort of popping up and popping back. I mean, they're only going for 9 minutes, but have you actually thought about any of the things, a bit like what Chris was saying earlier, is that you could lead different people to a forest of trees on this very planet, and some people would get it and some people wouldn't. So now that we have seemed to have somehow magically removed some of these, I know obviously the things that the real astronauts do are completely different, but in the kind of mainstream perception, it's like, oh, you can just pop up to space now, you can be Kim Kardashian, you don't even have to be Kim Kardashian, you could just go on a couple of dates with Kim Kardashian and go up into space. So it's like, what are we doing? Why are we doing this? And I think
we will, by the way, announce the results of the prize draw after the show to find out who has won that.
I just wanted to say one thing, because I do recognise that I'm very much the junior partner in this conversation, but I do have a small suggestion for a solution, which is that my young son, looked a bit upset a few days ago, and I said, "What's the matter?" He said, "Oh, Mummy, I'm sad." And I said, "Why?" He said, "Well, Mummy, I don't want you to go to space again. It's very dangerous." And I said, I haven't been to space. And he said, "No, I just don't want you to do it again, okay? Because I know now that it's dangerous to go up into space, and I just really don't want you to go. You promise me you won't go to space." And I said, okay, I mean, I really haven't been to space, but I'm willing to promise you that I won't go to space again. But how do you know I've been to space? He said, "No, I've seen it." I said, "What do you mean?" "You've seen it." He said, "I've seen the pictures of you in space." And for a while, this stumped me. And then I realised he'd been looking at my iPad, and what he'd found, speaking of marketing, was the promotional picture of me. I could have...
Hey, I've got a photograph just like that of me.
Yeah. Oh, no, now the whole lid's been blown off. All of this stuff was just filmed in Burbank. No one's been into space.
There's a solution
See, you're
here.
a bigger person than me, Katie, because if my son said to me, "I don't want you going to space again," I think, yeah, I'll let him believe that. I think, that's probably the biggest achievement he's ever going to think. Yeah, sure, son. Yeah, I went into space.
I think there are two distinct issues here. One is... how do we expand into space? As you said, there are issues of regulation and the legal frameworks and so on, how we do it responsibly. But there's also the question, should we, and what are the benefits? I just wanted very briefly to go to Chris and Nicole to speak of the benefits. Now, we've spoken about the intellectual, I suppose, almost philosophical, spiritual benefits. But in terms of practical benefits of expanding our civilization to near Earth orbit, the Moon and Mars and beyond into the asteroids, could you briefly, as Robin said, explain and make the case for why we should be looking to expand as a species out into space?
And this might seem like kind of a kumbaya response, but I think if we look back, we could be having the same argument about even going to the moon the first time, or even sending humans to space the first time. And yet, I think that historically, and what we have to look forward to, at least when I look at what we're doing with human spaceflight, everything about it ultimately is about improving life on Earth. In one way, either deliberately or, peripherally, is about improving life on Earth. And I remember when I went to the space station the first time, I had that question in my mind. It's like, wow, really, is what we're doing on the space station, is it worth this? Is it all? And I believed it myself. I wouldn't have strapped onto a rocket with my 7-year-old son at home if I didn't believe that this was, a worthy mission to be going on. And I'll tell you, I was blown away by the fact that every bit of science we're doing there, the way the station is built, the relationships, the international partnership, all of it, in one way or another, is ultimately about improving life on Earth. I really don't think we'd be in the place we are right now with the abundance that's on the planet, and the way that we could, if, again, behave like crewmates, not passengers, take advantage of it with all we're doing in space and how that's brought back to Earth.
Yeah, I think that's well said. To keep it short, maybe one specific point also is if we truly want to understand our planet, it's really difficult to measure from the surface. If I ask anybody on this panel, what's the current cubic volume of ice in Antarctica or in Greenland, it's virtually impossible to determine in any sort of real time from the surface. Whereas with satellites orbiting the world, we can answer that question very accurately every single day. So to try and understand our planet, to be able to measure it, there is tremendous leveraged advantage to be able to do it from orbit, where it costs far less energy and happens much more quickly than we can from the surface. So there's that advantage to the high ground also.
As usual on this show, I think we've only started the conversation. We still haven't really dealt with the elephant problem either, so we will come back to that at some point. To help with that, obviously, we always ask our audience a question, and this week we asked them, what do you wish you could see from space, and why? The first answer we got was from Drew, who said, the Great Wall of China or Brian's hair, both monuments of human endeavour that will last for millennia.
I don't think that's scientifically accurate. My hair will not last as long as the Great Wall of China. Well, I'm gonna go for this one because there's no way it'll get broadcast, but I like it anyway. From Brian Ashton, he said, "I would suggest the soul of the British government, but a microscope cannot be used from space." It's not going to get on, is it?
England, I like this one. The answer is just England, bloody cloud.
Yeah, this is a good one from Kevin. A giant food item in each country reflecting their cuisine.
Oh, I like that.
So, for example, for England, a giant Yorkshire pudding. I'm going to ask that. I want to go around the panel. So, Carolyn, I know you're in California. So, what would be the giant food item that represented the state of California?
Oh, gee, an avocado.
An avocado. A giant avocado. Florida, Nicole?
Oh, I'll go orange.
Orange from Florida.
Orange.
Chris, Toronto?
I think an entire lake of maple syrup.
Paul said, Brian Cox's Windows password. I will then sign him up for subscriptions to the Flat Earth Society and Rochdale Football Club.
And then the audience, have to decide which one will annoy him more. There we go. That's the...
I don't know. No, I'm not going to go there. I like Rochdale. My mum was born in Rochdale. I'll leave it.
So thank you very much thank you very much to our fantastic panel who were Carolyn Porco, Nicole Stock, Chris Hadfield and Katie Brand. Now, next week, we're going to be asking, really, it seems very pertinent from what everyone's just said there, we're going to be asking the question, but is the Earth flat?
No, we're not.
Well...
We're not.
We're kind of...
Can we just wrap... I just want to wrap that up. Chris, is the Earth flat?
No.
Nicole?
No.
Carolyn?
Demonstrably not.
Well, there you go. That's it. We've done that.
Hang on, what about Katie? She's the one who's going to blow the whistle.
Do I have the veto? That's the issue here. No, it's not.
Well, actually, what we are going to... If we do ever do that episode, by the way, Brian, that will be another example of an episode where you don't need to turn up. We will just have a recording of you weeping. That was all we'll do. We'll just keep dropping that in. I mean, to be fair, actually, Brian, I'm saying all that, but, I mean, the Earth is flat, isn't it? Because if we look at the holographic principle, and we have this idea that we're actually merely two-dimensional projections from space, to some extent, we are just a flat Earth, aren't we?
Join us next week on the Infinite Monkey Cage when, as Robin takes a well-earned break, we will ask... Are crows cleverer than comedians? Goodbye.
In the infinite monkey cage, without your trousers. In the infinite monkey cage. Now nice again.
Hello, welcome to the Infinite Monkey Cage podcast. This is the podcast which is slightly longer, or sometimes actually very much longer than the version you may have heard on Radio 4. And for purposes of balance, quite soon we're actually going to be using the podcast to bring out much, much shorter versions, like about 7 minutes, which are very much the best of what happened in our conversation about ravens or quantum cosmology. I didn't let you say anything, did I, Brian?
Can I say something?
No, it's fine. Anyway, listen.
Hello, I'm Robin Ince.
And I'm Brian Cox. In the last couple of years, many people have considered leaving the country. But we're more ambitious than that. We've decided to become Martians. But what skills will we need to take the monkey cage into space?
Now, to be an astronaut, you need 3 things in particular, which is, I would say, peak physical fitness, peak mental agility, and highly absorbent underwear. And I have at least one of those things. And Brian, shut up. I'm very good at doing puzzles. And in fact, I can do the Times crossword, I would say, in under an hour. And if it takes more than an hour, it doesn't matter. I don't have to leave my armchair because of the... Anyway, look, so you...
Today we ask, what does it take to be an astronaut and what lies ahead for human spaceflight? We're joined by two astronauts and, for balance, someone who isn't. And they are...
Hello, I'm Tim Peake. I'm a European Space Agency astronaut, and the most surprising thing that I experienced in space was seeing some lights flying in formation past the cupola window, and then discovering that it was Russian urine leaking from the ISS.
Hello, I'm Helen Sharman. I'm the first British astronaut, scientist, science communicator, not in that order. And the most surprising thing I experienced in space was a power cut.
I'm Mark Steele. I was the 8th British astronaut. And I had a very similar experience to Tim, but I can't use that anecdote now. But my hope really was to play cricket in space, as I think is the one chance I'd have of ever hitting a 6.
And this is our panel. Can I just ask both you, Helen and Tim, I've heard that when the urine goes out and it kind of sparks stuff, but then does it kind of explode or it kind of... this wasn't where we were going to start, but you brought it up, Tim, to be quite honest. So, does that happen?
Helen will be able to describe in the chemistry behind it, but it just crystallizes instantaneously, and then the light obviously reflects, and that's what you see sparkling.
Oh,
so yeah, Helen.
So... better, yes.
How did you know it was Russian?
Because it was coming out.
Hammer and sickle on the end.
It was coming out. It was coming out the Progress vehicle, and I saw where it was coming from. So I actually went straight to the Progress, and there I saw Yuri with a screwdriver, swearing in Russian, and so I knew that was exactly where the problem was. He had already realised that something was quite wrong because he'd seen the pressure dropping in the tank, so he'd gone down there to investigate. So I just went to tell him it is actually leaking out the side. Perhaps you want to come and take a look.
That is that is an episode of You Bet I would like to see, someone's skill, which is to tell the nationality by the crystals of urine. So if anyone is thinking of doing a You Bet version in space, I'm available to host. Let's move on quickly. First of all, I want to know, what was the process of it? How did you become an astronaut?
So I applied for a job, like most people do for any jobs. Perhaps unless you're a comedian. I don't know if you apply to be a comedian. Perhaps you don't. But
we apply for every other job and are turned down. That's basically what happens, and then we have to.
So yeah, this was a position that was open all of a sudden. People from Britain could apply for a mission that had been created actually to put the first Briton into space. And I heard it before. You look on the European Space Agency website, but nowadays, when I applied, there was no website. So this was 1989, before the internet, and I heard about it on the radio. So driving my car home from work, and heard an advert for a space mission, decided to apply. Never thought I would get chosen, but as it turns out, you never know. It's worth a go.
And was it quite a rigorous selection process? How long did it take?
So it was quite quick as space selections go, because a mission had been already assigned about 2 years after the advert had been announced. So it was like a company had been set up to manage this mission, a British company to liaise with the then Soviet Space Agency. And as soon as they'd got an agreement, they let out this advert to recruit their astronauts. So it had to be quite quick, because then we needed to be in position, I think it was actually 5 months later. So in June I heard the advert, in November I was already beginning my training.
And it's the training, the centrifuges, all the things that we imagine you have to go through when you're an astronaut. You get turned upside down and...
in the training or in the selection?
In the selection.
In the selection. Yes, in the selection. In fact, the selection was the first time I actually went into a centrifuge ever, and actually the last time. So I didn't do any centrifuge in training. It was all in selection. So once they decided they'd selected you, as far as they were concerned, I was G-force tolerant, and they didn't need to worry again. But no, there's a lot of this motion sickness testing as well. So the Soviets were quite keen. I mean, Tim can tell us if they're still as keen, but they were really keen to make sure that we didn't throw up in space. But I mean, having never done it before, I got no idea how I was going to feel. And I was more worried about blacking out, actually. I got no idea how to really cope with this, because I'd never done a centrifuge ever. I mean, I bet if you're a helicopter pilot, you do centrifuges, don't you, every so often?
I hadn't actually done the centrifuge. No, my first time in a centrifuge was during training in Star City in Moscow.
So not even in selection?
Not even in selection. We had a very different selection process. I mean, yours was much more rigorous physically, I think. And it reminds me of speaking to some of my Canadian colleagues who do all sorts of bizarre bizarre stuff during the Canadian selection process, like having to dive to the bottom of pools and do the jigsaw puzzles and things, and being locked in a room that's filling with water and having to do mental exercises before you can get out. The European Space Agency was actually very civilized in comparison.
A way to improve on GCSE results, wouldn't it? In the classroom. Anyway,
I'm just thinking how sad it is, though. If you'd managed to do everything, you didn't vomit, you got to the bottom of the sea, you did all that stuff, but you weren't very good at jigsaws. That's a really...
I can't find the corners.
All of this in the psychological training and psychological testing for our selection was a lot of this, on a two-dimensional piece of paper, can you envisage what it's like in 3 dimensions, twist round this apparent shape 90 degrees in a certain way, and what shape do you end up with? Is it A, B, C or D, that kind of thing. So that was all done in a sort of a psychological testing profile.
And that was similar to the European selection. We had lots of psychological testing, psychological profiling throughout the whole year. So there was no way you could possibly cheat. So by the end of the year, they really had a good grasp on what your character and personality was like.
But that's why that film was rubbish then, wasn't it, with Sandra Bullock in it, when she's just a complete introverted, introspective mess. In the selection process, she'd have lasted about 3 seconds, wouldn't they? She'd have gone, I don't really... Get out!
No. Mark, you don't remember the scene where she did a 300-piece jigsaw puzzle of Corfe Castle?
Yeah.
So, swung it for her.
The whole film, If Sandra Bullock had realised she'd got a backpack on in the first 5 minutes of the film, she'd have steered herself back to the space station and everything would have been fine and there'd have been no film. So,
Can I just say that for people listening to Monkey Cage, you will have heard last week's episode where Robin also mentioned Corfe Castle in a different context. Would you like to tell people?
No, I won't. You'll have to listen and find out some of my Corfe Castle secrets. Today's episode is brought to you by English Heritage.
He had an erotic dream about the masonry at Corfe Castle.
Yeah. Well, it was a show all about the science of dreams, right? It wasn't halfway through a show about periodic tables saying, can I stop you there, Professor? I had a dream about Corfe Castle and it was eroticised masonry. That would have probably meant... Sorry, Mark.
No, my favourite mention of space ever in the media was on The Weakest Link. My favourite answer ever on that programme. And the question was, what structure built in the 2nd century AD is said to be the only building visible from outer space? And the bloke said, the Millennium Dome. To be wrong for so many reasons.
But Tim, you were, I suppose you took the traditional route in a sense that you were a test pilot.
Yes.
Before.
Yeah. So yes, it was much more traditional. Having said that, my colleagues were not all military test pilots, and we have scientists, engineers, medical doctors, all selected in the European Space Agency, and school teachers as well within the astronaut corps. So we select from a much more diverse background now than when people might traditionally think back to the Mercury, Gemini, Apollo program and those early Russian cosmonauts as well, who were all kind of alpha male, fast jet test pilot community. So it's very different now. And what's fascinating is to see how the selection criteria has changed over the years as well, from going the very initial sort of testing of spacecraft into the unknown and pushing the boundaries, to now looking at long duration spaceflight. And as Helen was saying, talking about medical fitness and psychological fitness, being able to live up there for 6 months, a year, looking forward to 3-year missions to Mars.
Is that the biggest obstacle now then? Because that's sort of, as the lay person, that's what you hear when they're talking about, for instance, people going to Mars. That seems to be the biggest obstacle, not the actual business of getting someone there, but of getting someone there without them going so doolally they can barely do a six jigsaw piece of Lulworth Castle.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, speaking to some of the Apollo astronauts, there's a huge shift in perspective from seeing the Earth just in low Earth orbit to seeing the Earth from 400,000 kilometers away. But even then, the Earth is recognizable as our home planet. But when you go on a trip to Mars and the Earth disappears to just one of the other bright lights in the sky, just like any other star, and you really have lost visibility of your home planet, that will have a psychological impact on the crew. And you've got to make sure people are aware of that and they're trained for that and they're right character and personality to deal with that, and for that length of time as well, and the prospect that you're going on an extremely high risk mission.
I think it's also the communication. So from Earth to Mars. So in low Earth orbit, it's pretty much instantaneous to get radio signals from the ground up to space station. But if you go to Mars, of course, it could take at best about 4 minutes to get a signal to Mars. At worst, when Mars is furthest away, we're talking over 20 minutes, and then another 20 minutes or so to get that signal or that reply back to Earth. So I think it's that isolation as well. It's not just sort of seeing the Earth. The Apollo astronauts, but they went for a relatively short time, actually. And it's only been Soviets and the Russians who were up for very long periods of time. They typically went for 6 months or even a year. And then now the Americans have started to join in on a space station. So they're going for longer duration missions as well. But they were used to going up for 6 months. And when I was up, the back of the Earth, around the wrong side of the Earth to the Soviet Union, we had no communication with mission control whatsoever. So even now in Russian memory, they may not have such a problem of going to Mars as perhaps some of the Americans might.
That's right, and actually that's interesting because we're almost having to train not just the astronauts for the future missions, but train mission control as well. Well, for the last 10 years, the space station has become this fantastic scientific laboratory, and we have an amazing working environment, so we're putting a lot of science experiments up there, but it's almost become very routine. Like Helen says, we've got instant communications all the way around the planet. We have very few moments of the day where we might have a couple of minutes of communication drop out, and you might not get your terabyte of bandwidth that you're getting down to Earth. And that kind of environment is great for what we need the ISS to do. But when we're looking towards the future and we want to get astronauts and mission control trained back to being, or the astronauts being much more autonomous, and mission control having to hand back that autonomy to the crew, that's something we're working on. We're talking about using the space station as a test bed for Mars now, and having perhaps a period of a couple of weeks where we actually do a simulated Mars mission from on board the space station.
You talked about the psychological aspects of long duration spaceflight, but could you just describe what it's like? I assume you can't really train for that launch and then being in space and then living in space for days at a time. Could you describe what that felt like from the launch up through to your first experience of space?
Well, I think the launch, you can't train for the actual physical feeling of it, can you, Tim? I mean, you can do a centrifuge, but that just gives you G-forces. You can't really train for the bits of vibration, hearing the clunks and bangs, and then suddenly, as the light streams in through the window, once you've jettisoned the fairing, when you're out of the atmosphere, seeing the Earth for the first time, all those things. But I think what you can be selected for is a kind of a mentality, a psychological profile that's actually reasonably calm, the kind of person who takes in information, processes it, and then works it out. You don't typically get astronauts who are really excitable, but neither do we get astronauts who are pretty depressive. I mean, that would make a pretty bad crewmate, wouldn't it, for 6 months, I imagine. So I think it's that psychological profile in the testing that actually does an awful lot. And then once you've trained to do your mission, then you just get on with the job you've been trained to do, think things through if necessary. But I mean, in terms of a long period away from Earth, I was only away for 8 days. Tim, you were there for, 5-6 months?
Yeah, 6 months, and I was up when I arrived on the space station. Scott Kelly was my commander. He'd already been up there for 9 months, and he was spending a year up in space. So that was really interesting to him and Misha Kornienko as well. Yeah, so it is when you go on the mission. Actually, for me, I think the launch itself was hugely exciting, and like you say, you can't train for it. There's all these vibrations and everything, but actually the re-entry was even more so. And I remember Jeff Williams speaking to me the night before re-entry, and I was kind of getting all my stuff ready to go, and he said, "Now, Tim, re-entry is like nothing you have ever experienced before." He said, "There'll be several times during re-entry when you think it's all gone horribly wrong." He said, "It hasn't." He said, "Don't worry. There are a lot of explosions. There's a lot of noise. There's a lot of vibration. There's a huge amount of heat. You'll be sweating buckets." And he said, "It's all perfectly normal."
The biggest thing I thought actually was this, when the parachutes come out, because there's a big sort of hole really where the parachute's stored on one side, I suppose, of the Soyuz. It's towards the top, but it's actually at the side. It's not physically on the top because, of course, that top is connected to your other module but to start with, and before you've jettisoned that. So the parachute comes out from one side, and so the Soyuz itself swings quite violently, and it's not until you've managed to get the parachute straight above you that swinging sort of stops. But I think, we in the training we had that profile. We knew the time and the G-force that was going to be created side to side, but actually feeling that, it's quite taken by surprise, I think.
And how sort of closed in are you then when this is happening?
Shall we demonstrate? For all the people listening, we can demonstrate here. We are touching shoulders.
Yeah, you are. You get very friendly in the Soyuz. You get to know your crewmates very well, but you are literally touching and you're squeezed in there. And there's all sorts of stuff packed around you as well. Even when you're in the simulators in Star City, they're quite spacious. But when you get in the real Soyuz and they really pack everything in and you're coming down with the science experiments around you as well, there's not an inch of space left.
And it's never routine, is it? I remember, because we covered your launch, Tim, on both the launch and the docking live, stargazing. And I remember we were with Chris Hadfield when you were docking. And I think you had a sort of a non-standard docking, didn't you? I think something broke on the spacecraft, a retro rocket or something. And we were, myself and Dara, going, oh no, what's happened? It's gone, it's reversing. And Chris is like, no, it's just they'll learn how to fly the spacecraft again and then they'll dock it.
It was funny watching back. I was watching Chris's commentary back, and it was great because he knew actually that it was a little bit more serious than he was letting on. So he was just doing the cool, calm astronaut.
He was very calm.
Yeah. Because the initial abort, that's not unusual. It happens occasionally with the Soyuz, and then Yuri took manual control. But the first manual docking, Yuri was having a really hard time seeing the docking port. The sun was setting, so the whole space station was like a bright mirror reflecting all this light down the periscope. So he couldn't really see where he was going, and he was under a lot of pressure from Russian mission control to get it docked, because, as Helen said, that we were running out of communication time over Russian territory, so they wanted to do this whilst we had Russian communications. Things didn't go well at all during the first manual docking, but Yuri he's a very cool Russian cosmonaut, 6 times up in space, and just backed it off, came back out into space again, and then brought it back in for a textbook docking.
Mark, do you think you have the psychological makeup required that means you could have been an astronaut?
I am too scared to go on a waltzer. I have no faith whatsoever in whoever's put the rivets in planes. I find utterly, however much I'm a fan of science over mysticism, once I'm in a plane, I find myself thinking things like, well, while we're above the clouds, at least if the plane conks out, we can land on one of them. I'm just sort of, I'm in complete awe, really, of Tim and Helen, because it's all the psychology of it, putting trust in the science of it. So when it swings violently or learning, oh, right, these explosions, that's all normal. No, that makes you quite unusual.
Would you not like the experiments around you? It's like they've got a little sideboard, and all of the antiques are falling off the shelf.
Would you like to hold on to the test tube?
Would you not like to see that?
That's not too far off the mark.
Don't drop the Russian urine!
Really, we'd packed in so much into our Soyuz when we were coming back, and it was quite windy once we got lowish to the ground, and the wind then blows the parachutes a bit sideways, so you're coming in at a bit of an angle. So you've got these lovely, what's called soft landing retro rockets, and Tim will tell you that there is no such thing as a soft landing, but they naively call these things soft landing retro rockets. At the bottom of the Soyuz, it's about 1.5 meters above the ground. These fire to make the landing this bit softer. But if they don't fire perpendicular, they fire a bit of an angle because the wind has blown your parachute sideways a bit, then they're going to make you tumble head over heels. So we tumbled head over heels. All the stuff that we'd packed into the Soyuz, not very well, the stuff that we were holding on our bellies, basically, which had come back in at 5 and a bit G, so, pretty heavy on top of us, all of that sort of tumbled around the Soyuz. We tumbled head over heels a few times, ended on our sides. And there's a split second when, you stop tumbling and you think, great, okay, we're okay. And I can't remember which one of us said first, you okay? And then somebody else said, yeah, I'm okay. So we ascertained that we're all right. And then I was on the top, sideways. And I remember turning my head round just to see, I could just about see the commander's hands. And the engineer who was on the bottom was just covered in all of these things. And suddenly it's the hands sort of gradually appearing and pushing through all this stuff. And that's how we landed. Yeah.
I love That's like your dad on holiday. We better stick the roof rack on. We've got a lot more stuff.
You were lucky to get that stuff through security.
Well, I think you mentioned Scott Kelly. I remember that. I think when he first went up, before you went up, didn't it? Because you're allowed to take certain luxury goods, aren't you? Certain goods you want. And whoever the commander was before him had taken up a gorilla costume, hadn't he?
That was Scott who got it sent up by his brother Mark Kelly, his twin brother. Arranged it kind of under the radar, so there were not many people who realised that was even going up. Otherwise, they would have stopped it, I'm sure. So it kind of got shoved in the top of one of the Cygnus or SpaceX vehicles and arrived on board the space station. And when Scott first told me he had this gorilla suit, I said, "What? You mean like a mask or something?" He said, "No, I've got the entire gorilla suit." I didn't believe it. I said, how on earth did you get a gorilla suit in space? He said, "Look, I want to get dressed up in this thing and hide in Tim Copra's crew quarters." So when Tim goes in there, he's going to get the shock of his life. So he got dressed up and hid there. And he said, "Go and tell Tim that he needs to go and make a call to mission control, which you can only do from your crew quarter." So I duly went and told Tim Copra, and of course he went to his crew quarter, and Scott burst out in this gorilla suit and scared the living daylights out of him.
And just he got through all those psychological protocols. He's brilliant at doing jigsaw.
I want to know, how did this gorilla costume get through all of the dust tests? Because, our clothes were designed not to create dust. Anything that we took, even mission patches were supposed to be especially dust-free. So how can a gorilla costume be dust-free?
Yeah. You have to ask Mark Kelly that, I think. He obviously pulled some strings.
Can you describe the space stations you were on, just briefly? Because, Helen, you're on Mir, Tim on the ISS. Can you just characterise what that's like living on that station?
Well, as a comparison, I hope Tim won't mind me saying, but I have heard that if you had to compare the two, being on International Space Station now, everybody says it's just luxury. You've got your communications 24/7, you can have Heston Blumenthal food. It's all just absolutely amazing luxury and like living on a 4-star hotel. And the Mir Space Station is like going on a family camping trip.
We did look at a picture of the Mir space station today, and we just said it just looks like the worst shed that's ever been made. It's incredible. When you first see that, that's where we're going to live.
It's basic, but it works. To be quite honest, the International Space Station now is still based on the Mir space station. The modular design, the main base block is very, very similar, isn't it, Tim? So the technology's there. All you've got to do is keep air inside. It relies on a couple of O-ring seals. It is quite basic. You keep air inside. You've got to scrub the air clean. And as long as you can do that and provide yourself with the right kind of, the food and drink and so on, you've got something that's livable in. Now, a lot of people, I would say most astronauts, would quite happily go into space in something that is, a family camping trip. I quite like going camping anyway, I'm quite happy to rough it. So it's the fact that it was a bit, let's say, basic doesn't really matter. Submarines can be pretty basic, but people can survive in them.
What's funny about the ISS is Helen says actually half of it, the Russian segment, is just the Mir space station in a different configuration. But it's the same diameter modules. They really haven't changed anything. Same communication systems. And then you move into what's called the American segment, but actually incorporates the Japanese, European, Canadian elements. And that's all very shiny. It's a wider diameter. Everything in the US segment flew up on the shuttle, so a much larger diameter cargo bay. So you get this real juxtaposition between coming from the cozy Russian segment, where they even have carpet up the walls and on the ceiling, to this wide diameter American segment, which, as Helen says, is much more spacious. We have exercise equipment in there. You even have sort of flat screens, TV that you can watch and things like that.
Luxury. But you once told me that because different modules got different noise. I mentioned about we talk about the dust and so on, and dust has to be cleaned from the air, as everything does, and you have to circulate the air with fans in order to keep the air moving, because you don't get the convection that we get on Earth. Now, the fans are quite noisy, and I know on Mir we had about 69 decibels of constant white noise from the fans. So we had to monitor our own hearing, and the astronauts get back to Earth, and the families all complain that they need a TV turned up too loud and so on, because really hearing levels are damaged at length. But now it's got a bit better, and aren't different modules slightly different?
Yeah, it's much better. I mean, generally it's about 30, 40 decibel, which is like a noisy office room, really, with lots of people talking. That would be about that kind of noise level. That's the majority of the space station. But if somebody's running on the treadmill, for example, it can get up to 70. It's really, really noisy. But so each module has its own idiosyncrasies, and some are noisier than others.
God, they're brilliant. Listening to two astronauts is just like listening to two people in any other profession. It could be two gas fitters. Oh, of course, when we were back in the space station, you used to make a terrible racket, terrible. Of course, they've sorted all that out now with your modern space station. That in our day, we had the bloody clue. Couldn't have a gorilla suit up there. You can. Terrible. All the dust would get everywhere, all up your nose and everything. Terrible when it was swinging about violently coming back onto the re-entry. I haven't got a clue what they're doing back in that office.
The ISS, Tim, it's worth saying, it's one of the greatest engineering achievements, isn't it? It's a vast structure up there.
It is. It's phenomenal. When you see it for the first time from your tiny Soyuz spacecraft, when you're rendezvousing, and it kind of appears out of the dark, it's like Drax's space station in Moonraker, when it sort of looms out at you. But it's the size of a football pitch, 400 tons of hardware. And inside now is all of the habitation modules. It's about the size of a 747, so there's actually plenty of space. But from an engineering point of view, it's phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. It's been up there for over 20 years now, and inhabited for about 18, 19 years of that. So it's not a young space station by any means, but they do keep it very up to date. Everything's changing out. We're changing new batteries, new solar panel technology. We've got Wi-Fi on the space station. That was introduced a couple of years ago, tablets. And so whilst it's an old structure, it's very much cutting edge technology on the inside.
Helen, when you were up there, first of all, you were doing experiments up there, weren't you? So what were the biggest challenges in the period of time that you were up there?
Challenges. I suppose, seriously, it was finding stuff. The Mir space station, been up there a few years. I think it started off in, was it 86? I flew in 91, so it'd been up there about 5 years with different modules, like Tim said, International Space Station is sort of added to and built. Mir space station in the same way. So it wasn't as big as it could have been when I was there, but it was still, it'd been up there a while. And so, like any laboratory, where I'm sure Brian won't mind me saying, but scientists, we don't like to throw things away because it could come in useful at some point. And they've done the same with the space station. Or this particular gadget might come in useful. We'll keep this experiment there because that might come in useful at some point. The spare toilet we had was completely stuffed full of things that might come in useful and there were things that would they'd got things stored in places that weren't designed to store things. So elastic straps around the walls that had been sort of jerry-rigged on so that you would put your camera there or your camera lens there as well. And so actually it was finding things I found. So my job, let's say, was to get out a particular experiment to look at ceramic films. So I needed to find a number of different, like a frame and the films themselves and some tools to work with the airlock with and so on. And they would all be in different places, but they weren't in the places that they might have been had they been stored correctly, let's say. So I ended up having to spend a lot of time just finding stuff.
When we did a show about 2 years ago, I think it was in Trondheim, somewhere like that, I forget which astronaut it was, says space travel will be impossible without Velcro. Yeah. And I think that thing I did, the importance of things like that.
So everything has a little bit of Velcro on it, so you can stick it to the wall, and the wallpaper really like a soft Velcro. So everything's then got its place, and it's fine when you know exactly where it should be. In fact, one of the tasks my crew had after I left was to barcode everything so that we could then actually find things much more easily. And I think there was a lot of rubbish that was jettisoned as well. One of my big feedbacks to all the technical managers back on Earth was that this is seriously sort of debilitating and impacting operations. They need to do a good basic clear out, and that's what happened.
Now, Mir and the International Space Station are our first steps
out into space. So could we talk about the next steps? And I suppose, Tim, the planned next step is the Lunar Gateway, isn't it? One of the main plans. Could you describe that?
Yeah, so the Lunar Gateway is to get back out beyond low Earth orbit to support lunar operations again, a return to the moon, but this time in a more sustainable manner and a sustained presence on the lunar surface as well. So the Gateway is going to be a much smaller version of the International Space Station, and it's going to be in a highly elliptical orbit around the moon. It's about a 7-day orbital period. It'll come about as close as 3,000 kilometers to the lunar surface and out to 70,000 kilometers on the far side of the moon. And it will be able to facilitate lunar surface robotic and human missions. And because of that highly elliptical orbit, it means that you can quite easily change the plane of the orbit with low fuel usage. So you can actually support any part of the lunar surface. You're not just supporting just one area, the poles or the equator. So you can really have many missions to the lunar surface from the Gateway. It's going to be very much an international partnership based on the same International Space Station partnership. First modules should be launching in 2022. So really, in the next few years, we're going to see the construction happening.
And that will be constructed, obviously, by crews that are on that space station. So once the first module is in orbit around the moon, we expect astronauts to be there shortly afterwards.
Absolutely, yes. First module will be a power propulsion element, and then the second module will be a small habitation module, and then a lunar lander, and that's all going to happen between 2022 and 2024. So when Artemis 3 comes along, and this is the first crewed mission on NASA's new Orion spacecraft, so SLS, the Space Launch System, will launch this, a phenomenal rocket, larger than the Saturn V. Actually, the Orion spacecraft is powered by the European Space Agency service module, so Europe is very much part of this mission too. That first crewed Orion vehicle will go dock to the Gateway, and that will then have the first lunar surface operations again, hopefully 2024.
So it's assembled robotically, as it were, so you connect these three modules together, and then see everything's working, and then the crew go 2024. Mark actually, maybe, could be the first comedian in orbit around the moon.
Yeah, I've put down for it. So one of the things I find fascinating, many things I find fascinating, is just sort of, so when you talk about the international cooperation, and so in a sense, so you've got all this sort of amazing passion for science and just knowledge and so on that you exude so brilliantly. But it's all subject to the will of the people who control the world. So, we all know, obviously, that the space race was fueled by the Cold War, and President Johnson said, I don't want to go to bed by the light of a communist moon and that sort of thing. And so that's what fueled the space race. But that's, now that the Cold War is long since gone, and so you talk about sort of an international cooperation as if this is just part of the language now that you would use. But that's very different, isn't it, from your sorts of missions, from these sorts of missions being fueled by something that wasn't international cooperation. It was a very international hostility that fueled it. So it is subject to that. I went to a very strange event on the 50th anniversary of the first moon landing. I was in Paris. I went to this utterly peculiar event that was so Parisian. Nobody quite knew what it was. It was in the Grand Palais, which was this huge room, as big as St. Paul's, and there was a techno band playing in one corner, and then in the other corner there was a film of someone just banging a piano, and lots of people who dressed up for the night were sort of just standing there watching it and applauding, and there was food, which was one ravioli that was €15 each, things like that. It was utterly Parisian. And then Tom Pesquet, the astronaut, came out and was interviewed. And it was just fascinating how he was talking so passionately about all these different countries coming together in order to create these next missions and so on. And I thought how different that was from the original space race. And it also made me think, and this is terrible because I'm going to bring in the subject that no one wants to bring in, but it did make me realise he was explicit about this, that this is why he was passionate about the European Union and about the sort of cooperation that comes from that. And I thought, well, it hadn't really occurred to me that that's one of the reasons why people in your profession, to you, international cooperation is something that fuels the very projects that you exist for, if you like.
Does that make any
Absolutely,
sense?
it's very true, and really the Apollo Soyuz missions, they were the first breaking of the ice after the Cold War race. Or the space race began, and ever since Apollo Soyuz, we've just been building and building and building on that international cooperation. When you think it's incredible that some of the events that have happened during that period and the tensions between the countries involved, and yet in terms of space, we seem to be able to transcend those political differences, very much like the scientific community as well, and be able to have a long-term vision and a common goal. And I think that's the crux is that these programs, the objectives, are so important to every nation that international cooperation is absolutely key and will remain so for the next steps to the Gateway and beyond.
Helen, I'm interested in terms of public reaction as well, which is when Mark was talking about that. When we did the Apollo show, something that a lot of people talked about was, even though it was driven by this, Russia versus America, when those astronauts were travelling around the world, everyone always said, we've been to the moon. Everyone felt that there was this sense amongst all of the different populations of all of the different countries that we, the human race, had gone to the moon. Now, when you speak to people about space exploration, do you feel that that is something that happens, that once the adventure happens beyond the parochial boundaries of the planet Earth, people do see that as a uniting adventure?
I think there's two sides to it, actually. I think people do see that this is something that we do as individual people go into space, but it's done to help people, and it's done to progress exploration for everybody. Just just as we all went to the moon, we are in space. We are on the International Space Station to a point. The Chinese aren't on the International Space Station. They're looking at their own space station and their own lunar and Martian visits. So I think it's not completely there, but I think we're all still quite nationalistic about it. So when Tim was in space, we in Britain were really, really excited about space, and then it sort of waxes and wanes a bit. And the Italians are all very, very excited now because Luca Parmitano's up there, and so I think the space agencies still fund a lot of this stuff and still work a lot of the PR to make us very excited. So I think there's bits of both, but I think there's the social media as well makes it more accessible, and I think also people are excited because they can almost envisage themselves going. Tourism has been spoken about quite a bit. We all got very excited about Mars and the Mars One mission. Remember all that discussion about should we go to Mars and not come back? And it just, even though the mission was of course never going to happen and it might be ethically unsound and all of that, nonetheless, it was great public debate, and we all thought about dying on another planet. It got us thinking. So I think, people are starting to feel as though, even though it might not be their country, they're still kind of involved in some way.
Now, the Lunar Gateway, it's very exciting to be going back to the moon, multiple missions, surveying the moon, the poles, places we haven't been. But I suppose ultimately the goal in most people's mind is Mars. We've mentioned Mars briefly. Could you comment on the difference between missions to the moon, space stations in orbit around the moon, and then sending humans to Mars?
Yes, it's an incredible challenge. It's an order of magnitude greater than what we've managed to do previously in terms of the human physiology. We haven't really touched on that much, but the body changes so much when you go into space, and you notice it straight away. The first thing is you feel a bit sort of puffy faced, and you get a headache often. This intracranial pressure increases because all the fluid that's pulled in our legs shifts up to our chest and our head, and our body reacts by getting rid of that over the course of about 5 to 6 weeks. You actually lose almost 5 kilograms through body fluid, getting rid of body fluid. Your bones and muscles atrophy, your skin ages, your eyesight changes, your immune system becomes more depleted, cardiovascular system changes. It's a fantastic environment to study the human body. And so when we're looking at these trips to Mars, we have to be able to counteract all of these negative effects of spaceflight and try and remain fit and healthy, because you're going to go back into a gravity environment when you land on Mars. And we spoke about that rough re-entry and the landing with no such thing as a soft landing. At least we have people to help us get out of a capsule and to make sure we're okay and to provide shelter and food for us. Those first crews landing on Mars are going to have to do all of that themselves and have to be in a physical condition after an 8-month journey. So the challenges are immense. We have to get better radiation shielding. we get exposed to the equivalent of about 8 chest x-rays a day on board the International Space Station. That's going to be much more significant once we go outside of Earth's magnetosphere on a journey to Mars. So radiation shielding has to improve, propulsion technology has to improve so we can make that journey a lot faster. And then we've got to have good habitation modules, infrastructure in place that allow us to live and work on the red planet. It's a huge, huge challenge. On the moon, we're 5 days away from returning back to Earth, and if you have a gateway, you're only a few hours away from leaving the lunar surface and having the sanctuary of a gateway to go to.
You know, people talk about, you hear SpaceX and people like that are talking about going to Mars within a decade, and it sounds like actually we have problems to solve that may push it. I mean, I know it's an impossible question perhaps, but I mean, we're talking 20 years, 30 years.
I think so. I would be extremely surprised if we have a human mission to Mars before 2030, certainly to the surface of Mars. I think we might see an orbital mission, but I'd be extremely surprised if we see humans on Mars before 2030.
It's quite soon, though, so you're talking about a decade or so, possibly.
Yeah, I think towards the end of the 30s is about as ambitious as we could get, late 30s, and that's with assistance from both commercial and national space agencies working hand in hand.
Helen, you were saying earlier on about when talking about growing things in space. I mean, is that part of, I have read in the past, that's part of the things we need to understand, that there has been the ability to start growing lettuce in space, but there is going to be a point in that 18-month journey where lettuce is not going to be enough. And so is that also within in the technological ambition, there's also the ambition there with the organic as well?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think it's, Tim mentioned radiation, which is the first big thing. Because I suppose we could survive with food that we take, but that's hugely energetic. You need so much fuel to take the food. So if we can, once we're on the surface of Mars, if we can grow our own food there. But yes, as I understand, there is, Tim will perhaps correct me, but we've grown salady stuff, so basil, lettuce. You grew rocket lettuce, didn't you? Brilliant rocket lettuce. I don't know. I'm sure you didn't choose that. But yes, and salad stuff from seed, but not actually fruit. Not fruiting bodies. Matt Damon supposedly grew potatoes on Mars, but we don't know that we can do that yet. So yes, I'm sure people will want to be able to grow food and have a sort of to be able to better recycle, because I think the other big thing is even International Space Station, it recycles a lot of stuff, but we still get rid of heat, we still get rid of urine, we've heard about, of course, and there's a lot of waste still. And so to have that much more of a closed loop system so we don't waste so much, grow our own food, protect ourselves from radiation damage. And that protection, actually, I'd like to see, not just perhaps with, we talk about shielding of spacesuits and habitats, but perhaps with, by taking drugs, we'll be able to protect our body from the radiation that we do actually incur, which I think will be beautifully synergistic with a lot of cancer therapy research that's being done on Earth at the moment. So I'd love to see a lot more of that work just brought to completion and actually put to use on Mars.
Mark, I just wanted, now you've listened to this for the show. By the way, the one thing you've done to me, which has really annoyed me, is the moment you said, by the light of a communist moon, all I've had in my head is a Lenin and Stalin, Laurel and Hardy tribute act. And it's ruined my concentration. But what if you had...
5-year plan you've got me into.
We will start by pushing the piano up one step. Anyway, so this is...
That's not a Russian accent.
That doesn't matter what accent it is. It's Radio 4. Have you not heard some of the other shows and what they get away with? But I wonder, is there any particular experiment you think, this would be something wonderful to do in space? If you were given that opportunity, we put you on the waltzer, you've not been sick, we reckon you're ready for space. And so is there anything you think, that would be an amazing thing to do?
Well, I suppose, I don't know, listening to Tim and Helen is just sort of, what I'm fascinated by is just that all the obstacles to going to Mars, they're not the ones that we thought that they would be. So, I remember being at school when the moon landings happened, and I remember the teacher saying, by the year 2000 we'll be on Mars. Now, I don't suppose he had any inside information, Mr. Hood, at the time, but that's the sort of feeling that there was, and now it seems to be as far away as ever. But all of the obstacles, it was imagined at the time, were technological ones about how on earth you get something that far. But now it seems it's all human. It's all, how do we feed ourselves? How do we train someone psychologically to be in that condition all that time. So I don't know. I think that the human side of experimentation is probably what's most fascinating, rather than, I'm sure, when we finally get there, we'll find some rocks and muck about with them. But the amazing thing will be, what can humans do, just the physical thing of a human being. Well, that's why it's so much more captivating than some little clanky metal thing that we've sent up to various places, and people lose it. Yeah, clanky metal thing. There's one on Saturn, probably. I don't know, but there's.
No, it's a gas planet.
Yeah, so it just dissolved, didn't it?
Can't be on it.
God. But it's all those human things. What can a human do on Mars? Just walking on Mars would be. What's that like? That's what's captivating in the human mind, isn't it? I think, rather than sort of, any chemical experiments and so on, even though they will be infinitely more valuable, but just what captivates the mind is that.
And the idea is...
In defence of these clanky metal things, I mean, they can do some absolutely tremendous things, and of course, by sending them first, they make the human mission safe. But clanky metal things can, got much better, let's say, sort of sensory acuity. So they can really, they can discover one molecule and determine exactly what that one molecule is made out of. A human can't do that. A human can work flexibly, can decide that it's worth investigating that piece of ground over there because that looks different from that piece of ground over there, whereas a clanky metal thing will have been programmed to investigate two parts that might just happen to be identical. But no, when you... We've landed on a comet, Churyumov-Gerasimenko. We can actually go that far and land on something that is flying past us that fast. I mean, I think that really got people excited as well.
It's wonderful. It's extraordinary. I wasn't seriously arguing that, is there any metal on this thing and no humans? Scrap it. But I think in terms of what captivates people, the lay person, it is, well, as Tim was saying, it's human beings going up to this thing, just obviously personalised.
Yeah, and the idea, I suppose, is to establish permanent bases on the Moon, permanent bases on Mars, and then we start to talk about the slightly further into the future, a colony on Mars. And then human beings are spreading out into the solar system. We become a spacefaring civilization. So what are your thoughts on that progress into the future? I suppose the question is, can you see us becoming a truly spacefaring civilization?
Yes, I can. I mean, definitely in terms of a colonization on the lunar surface and onto Mars, absolutely. It's going to be very interesting to see how that develops, in what kind of partnerships, what sort of legal framework, regulatory framework we'll have on the lunar surface, on the Martian surface. Beyond Mars becomes very difficult again. I mean, if it's one order of magnitude to get to Mars, it's a whole different kettle of fish trying to get beyond Mars, and deeper exploration into the solar system. I'm not sure that humans in our organic form will ever leave our solar system. Maybe we will. Maybe some sort of post-human digital intelligence traveling at the speed of light will be what happens in 1,000 years in the future or beyond. But certainly in terms of becoming a multi-planetary species and having a colony on the Moon, colony on Mars, and maybe making it out to some of Saturn or Jupiter's moons as well, I think that is certainly a possible future for the human race.
And it's interesting what you said there. You read the great evangelists for space. There's people like Robert Zubrin, I know Elon Musk follows very closely. You made that point about different ways of living, different legal frameworks. It goes to what Mark said, actually. He sees that as one of the great benefits, because you put humans on a frontier and they do things that they don't do in the comfort of their own village or their own town, or in this case, their own planet. And that seems to me to be one of the most powerful reasons why we would want to explore. Is the human... The human
why
aspect.
Westerns are so popular, isn't it? It's like, we've arrived in this land, if you leave aside the slaughter of the people who are already there, but we arrive in this piece of land and we've got to work out our rules for ourselves. We can't just go by the ones we're brought up with.
Yeah, so one of the great byproducts of this exploration of Mars, the Moon and Mars and beyond, may be the development of different ways of living as a society.
But we're discussing this now, and we're not involving every single nation on Earth. And nation versus state, that's sort of another interesting sort of difference to consider as well. There are some people who, when the lunar astronauts went round to visit and trumpet how wonderful they'd done, there were some people around the world who were absolutely shocked and in horror about what had happened because their gods lived on the moon. And the moon had now been contaminated by humans, and they'd left behind bits of metal on the surface of the moon. So I think we have to be very careful when we are thinking about why we go, what we're going for. I really, the idea of planting a flag on the surface and claiming it for a nation state absolutely abhors me. I don't know what you think, Tim.
Absolutely, yes. And also this concept of we've messed up this planet, so let's move to another. I mean, that is not anything like what we're discussing in terms of space exploration. The two, they're not mutually exclusive. We're doing this in parallel, and many of the technologies that we're exploring in space exploration are absolutely going to help us overcome the challenges that we face back here on this planet. Helen was mentioning about closed life cycle systems in terms of water purification systems, in CO2 scrubbing, in terms of the environment that we're studying from space, looking back at planet Earth. Over 50% of all of our climate change data comes from space observations. So it is about, first and foremost, protecting the one place that we know where humans can live in the universe, and that is planet Earth. There's nothing more beautiful than planet Earth when you look into space. And when people say, what's your favourite planet? Well, it's Earth, because it looks beautiful, and it's the only place that we can actually enjoy ourselves and survive in an environment that we are comfortable in.
Mark, I was going to ask, because I thought get some of your expertise on this, is this idea of travelling to the moon. Now, you probably have had a similar experience as a working comedian, where you've probably been with 3 other comedians in a Fiat Uno going from Truro to Aberdeen in bad traffic. So can you give advice to those astronauts who are going to go to Mars about the things that will probably go wrong near one of the little chefs?
Send comics up there. Yeah, we'll be going, this is a doddle. I haven't got someone trying out their new material in the seat behind me while we're lurching wildly, re-entering the atmosphere.
Well, we asked the audience a question as well, and today's question it was, if you could perform one experiment in space, what would it be and why? And our first answer is, I would send Brian Blessed and have him shout, Gordon's alive, to see if his mighty voice can defy the vacuum of space. Oh, it would have been great. If he'd been in Alien, they'd have had to have a totally different poster slogan. You're quite right.
Oh, he would have never got onto the spacecraft. It would have turned round. I think if Brian had been on it. This one says, investigate the effects of microgravity on the exact point of the death of a strawberry. Why? To take my mind off Brexit. It's from Georgia.
This is from Aaron, who says the experiment that he would like to perform in space would be to see if Trump's toupee could reach escape velocity.
This is one I don't know if... Can you blow dry your hair in space, or does lack of gravity make it impossible? Either of you?
No, absolutely. I had long hair. Tim probably never had long hair in space. I'm sure I'd be much too cool for that. But no, I had long hair in space. And because you've got to circulate the air, because you don't get convection, so you circulate the air with fans. As the fans blow the air around, you can go buy a fan and you can get a blow dry by just sort of being by the fan. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. That's fantastic.
But I'd like to take a flat earther to space to see what they do. Do you get that? Do you, both of you get those people having a word with you, thinking that you're just, I don't know what they think you're doing.
Well, they don't think you... Well, let's not even go there, because I've had those on, and they just basically believe that everything is a fiction, and when the ISS goes past, that's just some kind of hologram.
But they are saying, they're saying that you made it up, aren't
Absolutely, they? Yeah. And I find it incredibly frustrating, but I've gone beyond that point now, and I think that anybody who seriously thinks that the Earth is flat...
That's so calm and measured to go through all that trouble of going through all them psychological profiles and jigsaws and centrifuging things and extraordinary experiments. You've gone out into space. There's been a bloke with a gorilla costume who was up there 6 months. You ran a marathon up there. You swung wildly, and there was explosions while you were coming back in. And then you get back here, and someone goes, "Nah, you never went."
It was funny. I
just find it a bit frustrating. I'm in awe.
I heard Charlie Duke talking earlier this year, and I didn't realise he had a twin brother. And he said during his lunar EVA, as Lunar Spacewalk, his brother walked into Mission Control, and there were so many heads turning, and I thinking, what is this publicity stunt going on, Charlie? You're supposed to be walking on the moon at the moment. But if the flat earthers then could have seen that, yeah.
Brilliant. Mark, have you got any more there?
No, go on.
Oh, okay. To establish if breaking wind is a viable form of astronaut propulsion. Now, actually, but that doesn't really. Does breaking wind, because all of that stuff is that
Conservation of momentum, it'll work.
Does it?
At some level.
Well, technically, but it doesn't come out fast enough, I think. Is it?
You know what? That's one of the few challenges I can imagine a man in England's going, well, I'm going to prove something.
You must have tried it.
Sneezing's a better job, because that really does. You get a good sort of bit of velocity coming out. Yeah.
Well, it's about the mass as well as the velocity.
Yeah, exactly.
Equally scientifically, Daisy Hollywood has asked or said that the experiment she would like would be to put Brian in orbit to see if he ages even more slowly in order to prove Einstein's general theory of relativity.
It's quite subtle on the space station, isn't it? Because you have a special relativistic effect because it's moving relative to the ground, so that means the clock runs slow relative to the ground. But also, it's in a weaker gravitational field, or space-time is curved a bit less, and therefore the clock runs faster. And so it's quite a delicate payoff between the velocity, the orbital velocity, and the altitude. And I don't actually know which one wins off the top of my head. Do you remember?
I think general relativity wins slightly, and I think you come back something like 0.07 seconds younger after a 6-month mission to space. But I don't know that for sure. I'll have to look it up.
So there's the answer.
So it's a measurable amount then? It's not like a billionth of a second?
No, I think it is a measurable amount. It's a very, very small amount.
I know for the GPS satellites, satellite navigation, they drift by 39,000 nanoseconds per day, the clocks. And 39,000 nanoseconds, that's 1,000 millionth of a second. That light travels 1 foot per nanosecond. So 30 centimetres. So that's a 39,000 feet positional error per day, if you don't correct.
These bits always terrify me because I really have no idea when he stops. There's a possibility, a constant tag game of different, new equation.
I just happen to know that number.
Just happened to know that number. Just happened. Anyway, thank you very much to our panel of the final show of this series. Thank you very much to Helen Sharman, Tim Peake and Mark Steele.
This is the end of the 20th series of The Infinite Monkey Cage. We'll be back in 2020 with the 21st series.
And the only worrying thing is that if the world does continue to go in the direction that it seems to be going, we'll actually be back on the BBC Light programme, sandwiched between the Clitheroe Kid and the Billy Cotton Band Show. Anyway, to play us out, here's Housewife's Choice. You've had all the powdered egg again, haven't you?
Thank you very much.
Goodbye.
Till now, nice again.